Chapter 358. The more important thing is, the more you can't make a decision in a hurry. It's not a bad thing to be steady and slow down. Gu Xingyin played with the chess piece in his hand and said thoughtfully. He was not a talkative person, especially a person who did not like to preach. In the eyes of Zhongzhou state people, Gu Xingyin had always been an elegant and wise character. He was silent most of the time, but as long as he spoke, others often had no room to refute. Such silence was undoubtedly more powerful and more awe-inspiring than the so-called torrent of words. But it seemed that this injury had changed Gu Xingyun's mind. Recently, he had been with Gu Qianchuan. When they chatted, Gu Xingyin talked more and more. Gu Qianchuan knew what this meant. He also knew that Gu Xingyin did not like him, but he knew that Gu Xingyin could only trust himself now. He liked Li Shi, but he did not dare to trust Li Shi. In the entire Kunlun city, he was the only one with great strength in the same position as him in the general direction. Gu Xingyin did not want to see Kunlun city decline. Gu Qianchuan did not want to either. This was the bottom line. All contradictions were insignificant in the face of the bottom line. Therefore, Gu Xingyin talked so much in the past few days, which was equivalent to teaching him how to take charge of Kunlun city in a very gentle way. Gu Qianchuan did not dislike this. For the sensitivity of power, Gu Xingyin was indeed much better than him. He nodded and waited for Gu Xingyin to go on. The internal crisis of the Wang family of Beihai is great, and it is an opportunity for everyone. At present, the major groups in Zhongzhou State seem to be quiet, but they must have made preparations in secret. Kunlun City is not suitable to move, but it is not suitable to stay still. For us, the Li family is the fat meat in our mouth. After the final maneuver is over and Li Tianlan dies, I must rest and recuperate. During this period of recuperation, it is a good opportunity for Kunlun City. Gu Xingyin slowly put down a chess piece on the chessboard. His eyes flickered under the light, with the brilliance of countless conspiracies and thoughts. What should I do? Gu Qianchuan asked for advice seriously. Li Qingxiang came over with 2 cups of tea. She placed the tea in front of the 2 of them. She sat in front of the coffee table and watched the 2 of them play chess. Her eyes were lively, but her temperament was quiet and gentle. Gu Xingyin glanced at her and said softly, "There is a change in Snow Country." Gu Qianchuan raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice, "It's more than a change. It's a great change." The internal strife of the Polar Ground Alliance had lasted for 3 years, and now it was completely out of control. In the past 2 months, 3 powerful families in Eastern Europe had been destroyed, all of which were the backbone of the Polar Ground Alliance. 2 of them came from Snow Country. In the Dark World, which was already in chaos, all the major forces were like sharks that had smelled the smell of blood. They were all concentrating their strength on Snow Country. If there were no accidents, when the Polar Ground Alliance completely collapsed, Snow Country would also become the decisive battlefield of all the major dark forces. All he lacked now was an opportunity. The matters of the Snow Empire have nothing to do with you. Gu Xingyin said flatly, "The final battle is unlikely to happen in these days. At least it will happen after the final maneuver. When Li Tianlan dies, the Li family is bound to fall into chaos. The Samsara Palace would also be affected. No one knew what Qin Weibai would do, but this might become an opportunity for the final battle. At that time, when everyone's attention is diverted, you can go to Wuyue to contact Wang Qinglei, show some attitude, and take the opportunity to completely destroy the Li family." He took a sip of tea and said softly, "Jiangxia is an area beyond his power. As long as we support him, he is likely to use Jiangxia as a favor. Battle of Snow Kingdom too far, too big, let them fight. I only want to take into account the immediate benefits. As long as we successfully take down Jiangxia, we will make a profit no matter what." Jiangsu and Zhujiang, Gu Qianchuan pondered and said, "It is not difficult to destroy the Li family, but it is not so easy to take Jiangxia. Wu Zhengmin has great influence, and Zhou Yuanshan has entered Jiangxia. The giant group is nothing to worry about." Gu Xingyin shook his head. The military has agreed to the final maneuver plan. Dongqing Rushi has officially abstained today, which is clear enough. Gu Qianchuan raised his eyebrows. You mean Dongqing Wudi has given up on Li Tianlan? Is it surprising? Gu Xingyun's tone was a little surprised. If the military wants to forcibly interfere with the final maneuver of the Sky Academy, the price they need to pay is likely to be the control of the Border Control Corps. Hundreds of thousands of troops for Li Tianlan? Is Li Tianlan so valuable? Why? Gu Qianchuan's eyes lit up, getting brighter and brighter. If Dongqing Wudi gave up on Li Tianlan, the Li family would be destroyed, and Jiangxia was not necessary for Zhou Yuanshan to stay. Vaguely, it seemed that the situation was really good. What if Dongqing Wudi didn't give up on Li Tianlan? Or Li Tianlan won the final maneuver? Li Qingchang suddenly said. Her voice was very light and tender. She was definitely a girl who could make anyone feel comfortable. She was light, delicate, charming, and youthful, but there was no sharpness or aggressiveness. Gu Xingyun was stunned. Then he shook his head and said calmly, "It doesn't make sense. Not to mention that he can't win. Even if he can go against the natural order in the end, he can't walk out of the Sky Academy." His eyes were a little playful. "Qianchuan, even if you don't take action, Wang Tianzong will kill him. In Zhongzhou State, no one can really stop the Wang family of Beihai. Just like in this era, no one can stop Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong will kill Li Tianlan. Why?" Li Qingsheng seemed a little curious. "Because he is too strong, so he has to die. If he dies in the final maneuver, it is because he is not strong enough, so he also has to die." Gu Xingyun's tone was indifferent. Li Qingsheng was silent for a while, then whispered, "The Chosen One is really bitter." Gu Xingyun smiled and felt that his daughter's words were really right. All living beings were bitter, and so were the Chosen One. Arrogant, domineering, and scrupulous, condescending, and insufferably arrogant. Even if he was invincible in the world and had power over the court, so what? The human world had never been really relaxed and complacent. As amazing as Li Tianlan was, he also had to struggle for survival and the future of the Li family. As powerful as Wang Shengxiao was, he also had to face the next fierce game of the Wang family of Beihai. As calm as Gu Hanhan was, he was bound to be targeted by Gu Qianchuan during the time he had to recuperate. His life would not be much better. As low-key as Jiang Shangyu, didn't he also endure and stay dormant, planning and fighting for the Jiang family to go to a higher level? The more dazzling, the lonelier, the more bitter. What a pity. Gu Xingyun whispered to himself. If Li Tianlan is really willing to bow his head, Kunlun City may give him a way to live, provided that he is really willing to bow his head. He glanced at Li Qingsheng. With Li Tianlan's aptitude, if he was really willing to bow his head to Kunlun City, he was even willing to marry his daughter, who was destined to have infinite glory in the future. Such a talent was definitely worth any force to win over at high price. Him? Gu Qianchuan sneered, and a trace of disgust flashed in his eyes. I think he is really confident to think that he is invincible among the young generation. In the team maneuver, he actually wants to go alone. He is arrogant and ignorant. Does he really think he can win? It should be. Gu Xingyun nodded and said, his confidence is not fake. Gu Qianchuan was even more unhappy. He frowned and said gloomily, since he wants to die, we don't have to be polite. The Li family is doomed. If we don't kill him, aren't we going against the natural order? Gu Xingyun did not speak. He suddenly thought of the end of today's symposium. When Li Tianlan left the conference room, he bent over and took off his shoes. At that time, Gu Xingyun felt that this action was absurd. Now that he thought about it, he still felt that it was absurd. What did he mean by taking off his shoes when he left today? Gu Qianchuan shook his head. He did not care about that young nonentity at all. Hans Han and Wang Shengxiao have analyzed that Li Tianlan's current strength should be extremely powerful, but his body is also extremely fragile. He is so fragile that he can't even bear a full blow from them. What do you think? Gu Xingyun nodded and said, it should be right. The time for him to recultivate is too short. If he wants to reach this level in 3 years, it must be the most extreme way. Giving up defense and pursuing absolute combat power is the only feasible way. Only he has wind and thunder veins can bear this way. Gu Qianchuan said yes and reached for the teacup. Pa! There was a soft sound next to the chessboard. Gu Qianchuan's hand had not touched the teacup, but the teacup was torn by an invisible force. The cracks spread from the bottom of the cup, and the tea overflowed and soaked the chessboard. Everyone was stunned. Gu Xingyun, who had been calm, suddenly narrowed his eyes and reached out to stop Gu Qianchuan from speaking. His attention was completely focused in an instant. A subtle sound sounded outside the purple gold pavilion. It was very small, but in Gu Xingyun's ears, it was so huge. The sound of thumping sounded rhythmically. It was very slow, but extremely powerful. That was the sound of heartbeat. Everyone could hear this loud, yet soft heartbeat. The heartbeat was neither fast nor slow. It was getting closer and closer, but from beginning to end, the frequency did not change at all. Another soft sound sounded with the heartbeat. That sound seemed to come from a very far place. It was as if someone was walking lightly across the grass. It was very soft, but the soft footsteps reverberated throughout the entire world. It directly passed through the impregnable purple gold pavilion and fell into the ears of the few of them. Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. The footsteps and the heartbeat sounded at the same time, getting closer and closer. Li Qingqing's face was pale, and then it became pale. Unconsciously, her heartbeat seemed to be completely synchronized with the heartbeat outside the door. It pulsed at the same time. The heartbeat was slow and powerful, but it was extremely depressed. Li Qingsheng even felt that her breathing became difficult in the heartbeat. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed from her mouth. She looked at Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan in panic, her eyes full of fear. Gu Qianchuan's body slowly tightened. The light of the purple gold pavilion was extinguished in a flash. The void appeared silently and enveloped him, Gu Xingyun and Li Qingsheng. However, the heartbeat outside the door continued to sound in the void where there should be no sound. It was slow and rhythmic. The voice had become very weak, but in the void where no sound should exist, it was like a clap of thunder. Gu Qianchuan's face suddenly changed. Bang! After the heartbeat, light and gentle footsteps stepped on the ground. The footsteps, which were usually ignored by everyone, filled the world. As the foot landed outside the door, the sturdy 6-story building of the purple gold pavilion trembled. This was not the sore intent. It was not the momentum. It was the absolute power that was as majestic as the sea, enough to tear mountains and rivers and break the void. Go and see, Gu Xingyun suddenly said. His strength was greatly reduced. In the void around Gu Qianchuan, his voice was hard and hurried. Gu Qianchuan stood up and walked to the door with Gu Xingyun. At this time, he did not dare to let Gu Xingyun leave his side. He put his hand on the door handle, pressed the button, and slowly pushed open the alloy door of the Capitol Pavilion, which was nearly 2 meters thick and 5 or 6 meters high. The night sky outside the purple gold pavilion was dimly illuminated by the lights. The sound of water flowing in the huge pool in front of the door was gentle, but the rockery in the water was slightly shaking with the never-ending footsteps. Gu Xingyun raised his head and looked into the distance. In the distant night sky, about 100 meters away, a thin but tall figure was walking over unhurriedly. His figure was getting closer and closer. Gu Xingyun saw that he wore an expressionless metal mask on his face. He was dressed in white and walked barefoot, but the heaven and earth of the purple gold pavilion seemed to tremble as he moved forward. The loud heartbeat kept ringing, and the power was like a wild wolf, sweeping in all directions. Gu Xingyun's pupils suddenly contracted, and he looked ridiculous. The metal mask obviously could not cover anything. The other party obviously did not intend to use this mask to cover anything. Li Tianlan, who they thought could only play hard with the young generation and probably could not beat them, appeared alone in the blink of an eye in front of the 2 invincible realm experts of Kunlun. Gu Xingyun's heart was in turmoil, but he forced himself to calm down and said coldly, "What are you doing here?" Li Tianlan wore a mask. Gu Xingyan did not call out his identity. For Kunlun City, this was definitely an opportunity. "I'm here to see how many dog teeth and legs you have." Li Tianlan's voice was soft, but the eyes behind the mask were full of evil and dangerous light. He did not tell Gu Xingyan. Only when he stepped on the ground with his bare feet could he completely feel the heavy power that belonged to this world. Bang! The heartbeat sounded again. Then it completely disappeared. There was no more nonsense. Li Tianlan lowered his body slightly. He strode forward. A white line suddenly appeared in the deep night sky, cutting through the darkness. The white line turned into a curtain in an instant. Li Tianlan stomped hard on ground. An unimaginably violent and majestic power was poured into the ground, causing it to boil. The 6-story purple gold pavilion shook violently. The huge rockery in front of the door, tens of meters high, flew directly into the sky in the surging power and broke into countless stones. The water in the pool rushed out in an overturned manner, turning into white waves and water curtains. Trample through mountains and rivers. Li Tianlan's body rose into the air and directly pounced on Gu Xingyan. A young man less than 22 years old took the initiative to attack the war god of Zhongzhou State. At this moment, the night, the water waves, the void, the white clothes, everything seemed to be frozen. There was only madness between heaven and earth. "Close the door." Gu Xingyan took a step back and shouted. Li Tianlan was very strong. But Gu Xingyan believed that no matter how strong he was no match for Gu Qianchuan. But the problem was that deep in his heart, he could not completely trust Gu Qianchuan. Bang! Gu Qianchuan took a step back. The alloy gate, which was more than 2 meters thick, was closed. But his own domain shrank in the hall and became extremely heavy. Boom! The next moment, the entire purple gold pavilion seemed to fly completely. The alloy gate, which weighed several tons, suddenly broke. Li Tianlan's figure, like the hardest weapon, hit the gate. Alloy fragments flew everywhere. Li Tianlan's figure directly crashed in. Huge alloy fragments floated in the void. Li Tianlan's figure fell directly to the ground in the void without being affected at all. The huge stairs of the purple gold pavilion shook wildly. An inconceivably tyrannical power filled every corner of the void. The silent void melted and collapsed in an instant. The light reappeared in the hall. Trample through the void. Chapter 359. The absolute darkness of the void collapsed and disappeared. The light shone in the hall again. But it seemed that the darkness before was so beautiful that the light that everyone could adapt to was extremely dazzling at this time. The huge alloy fragments hit the ground hard, and the fine dust rose in the hall. The light gently flowed on the white clothes made of cloud silk. Li Tianlan stood there, but it seemed that all the light suddenly gathered. Gu Qianchuan stood in front of Gu Xingyun and Li Qingqing. His eyes were fixed on Li Tianlan, with unconcealable astonishment and rage. Li Tianlan had grown into a figure worthy of everyone's attention. No one would deny this. Gu Qianchuan also attached great importance to him, but he only valued Li Tianlan's potential. He was an invincible realm expert. 3 years ago, the Divine List and the Holy List were re-ranked. Gu Qianchuan successfully took the last train and ranked last on the Holy List. Although Li Tianlan was now 9th on the Divine List, everyone knew that it was a special case. Gu Qianchuan could be sure that Li Tianlan's future would be terrible, but the future was the future. At least now, Li Tianlan, who was not in the invincible realm, was just an ant in his eyes. He did not expect that Li Tianlan would appear here tonight. Gu Xingyun did not expect it either. They were just discussing Li Tianlan's life and death. When they felt that the general trend was settled, Li Tianlan came to them alone. The loud beating of the heart and the soft footsteps had completely disappeared. Li Tianlan stood in front of them. In Gu Qianchuan's perception, Li Tianlan had become a ball of light that tore his own domain. He was so real, but illusory and unpredictable. Are you an invincible realm? Gu Qianchuan's voice was hoarse and insidious. His heart kept sinking and falling to the bottom. The invincible realm was above the four realms of martial arts. In the dark world, it was still a mysterious domain. Even an invincible realm expert could hardly guide others on how to break through this realm. Too many people were stuck in the half-step invincible realm and could not move forward. To enter the domain of the invincible realm, in addition to talent, luck was needed. At present, the most reliable saying was that the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in the four realms of martial arts was basically infinitely close to the physical limit of a human body. Half-step invincible realm was the real limit. If one wanted to surpass the limit and enter the invincible realm, he needed to temper his essence, qi, and spirit to the peak at the peak of his body. Only when the limit was sublimated would one be invincible. But even if they were invincible, there was still a difference in strength. As strong as Wang Tianzong was, he entered the invincible realm 3 years later than Li Kuang too. But as soon as he entered the invincible realm, his combat capability was close to the peak of the divine list. As for Gu Qianchuan, even though he entered the invincible realm by luck and practiced hard for several years, he barely entered the holy list. If one's physique, potential, willpower, and talent could be compensated in the four realms of martial arts, then once one entered the invincible realm, the gap in these aspects would be large enough to make one desperate. It was like the gap between Wang Tianzong, who ranked first on the divine list, and Gu Qianchuan, who ranked last on the holy list. No one doubted his potential. If he entered the invincible realm, with his potential, Gu Qianchuan would not even bother to escape. Not to mention him, even Gu Xingyun at his peak was not necessarily his opponent. But if he was really in the invincible realm, why did he have to endure until today? Gu Qianchuan stared at Li Tianlan without blinking. His body gradually tensed up, and the thick darkness and silence once again gathered around him. But the light in the hall was always shining. The void and the light merged with each other, and the whole hall seemed to become pure black and white. The world became an illusory background of black and white. Li Tianlan's figure was incomparably vivid and real. Yes and no. Li Tianlan answered Gu Qianchuan's question. He was telling the truth. After the great breakthrough, he had the dragon vein and the majestic fate. This time, Li Tianlan recultivated the martial arts that was completely different from the four realms of martial arts. But no matter how different it was, his goal was still the invincible realm. His body, willpower, and sword intent, in terms of condensation, had completely surpassed the half-step invincible realm and could be compared with the invincible realm. But there was still a big gap between his overall combat capability and the real invincible realm. In short, the quality of his martial arts had officially entered the gate of the invincible realm, but the quantity was still far from it. So now he could be regarded as invincible, but he was not really invincible. Gu Qianchuan was a little relieved. Li Tianlan had shifted his gaze and stared at Gu Xingyun. There was undisguised, killing intent in his eyes. At today's forum, Li Tianlan carefully felt Gu Xingyun's injury several times. He confirmed that Gu Xingyun's injury was extremely serious, which was the main reason why he came tonight. Gu Qianchuan was extremely strong, but only extremely strong. Li Tianlan was sure that Gu Xingyun's injury was his best chance to kill Gu Xingyun in the next few years. If he could succeed tonight, the special warfare group would be leaderless and in a mess, and the rise of the Li family would be right around the corner. Tianlan, are you courting death? Gu Xingyun looked at Li Tianlan with sharp eyes. His voice was still gentle, and even his address was very intimate. Li Tianlan smiled and nodded gently. Yes, this was his third sentence tonight. It was also the last sentence. The almost frozen black and white color in the hall suddenly broke in an instant. Li Tianlan took a step forward. A large number of shadows suddenly appeared in the huge and luxurious hall. Li Tianlan was barehanded, but his whole body was like an invincible divine weapon. He clenched one hand and punched Gu Qianchuan. The light on his body suddenly became extremely dazzling, and his hard arm tore the space. Wherever Li Tianlan passed, darkness and light alternated. The vast power drove his arm and his body. He seemed to be pulled by a violent force and appeared in front of Gu Qianchuan in an instant. A storm appeared out of thin air in the hall. The luxurious handmade sofa, the sturdy white marble tea table, the precious sandalwood tables and chairs, and the scarlet carpet were all broken into ashes in the crazy storm. The entire purple gold pavilion was disappearing. Only Li Tianlan was left in Gu Qianchuan's sight. The wind was biting cold. He narrowed his eyes tightly. The moment the white clothes appeared in front of him, Gu Qianchuan suddenly raised his palm. Bang! A wave of air visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared in the hall. Li Tianlan smashed his fist into Gu Qianchuan's palm. When their fists and palms collided, a large area of twisted space was completely shattered. The turbulent airwaves rushed straight into the sky. In the deafening roar, the ceiling of the purple gold pavilion, which was tens of meters high, suddenly broke. Dust flew up and down, and broken stones fell down. Li Tianlan's fist trembled slightly, but he did not stop moving at all. Smooth, swift, and natural, but with a kind of hearty violence. He withdrew his fist and lifted his knee. Li Tianlan raised one leg and hit Gu Qianchuan's abdomen with his knee. Gu Qianchuan suddenly roared and pressed his hands down with all his strength, holding down Li Tianlan's blow. His body rose into the sky with Li Tianlan's incredible strength. Gu Qianchuan's eyes were in a trance, and his arms were also trembling slightly. It seemed that a few minutes ago he had discussed with Gu Xingyun that Li Tianlan's biggest weakness should be his body. Now, in retrospect, Gu Qianchuan only felt that he had just said a joke. Li Tianlan's current body was completely unimaginable. His rapid speed and extreme strength were vividly displayed in him. But obviously, Li Tianlan showed no sign of being unable to bear it. At the moment when the fist and palm met, as an invincible realm expert, he had a close fight with the junior of the Li family with all his strength. But the opponent's body was still not overloaded. Gu Qianchuan's body flew higher and higher along with Li Tianlan's strength. Li Tianlan raised his head. Gu Qianchuan raised his hand without expression. In the storm of power, countless densely packed sword intents suddenly burst out. The sword intents condensed around Gu Qianchuan. The sword energy whistled, and one after another, like real giant swords, formed around him. Gu Qianchuan suddenly clenched his fist and punched Li Tianlan in the air. 10 skills of true martial arts, destruction of 5 elements. Boom! Several giant swords condensed around Gu Qianchuan fell at the same time. The ceiling stones were also falling. The sword energy soared into the sky. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly jumped up. Under the metal mask, his expression was completely hidden. Only a pair of eyes were ferocious and cold. He reached out. He clenched his fist. Boom! The falling boulders from the ceiling were smashed by his fist. The sword intents condensed in the air kept trembling under the absolute power. Li Tianlan kept punching. The condensed sword shadows and the falling stones kept breaking as he went up. The torn sword intents spread everywhere in the pavilion. The stairs burst into dust, and the solid walls began to crack. The huge pavilion was shaky in the intertwining of power and sword intents. Gu Qianchuan's figure rose again. The sword intents of Kunlun City were like a waterfall. Li Tianlan rose in the air. He punched and stepped in the air. Everything in his way, whether boulders or sword intents, burst into pieces. In this state, Li Tianlan only gave people the impression of madness. Gu Xingyun pulled Li Qingxing and quickly retreated out of the crumbling pavilion. Boom! The deafening noise reverberated on Mount Dong under the night sky. As soon as the father and daughter left the purple gold pavilion, the famous 6-story mansion in Zhongzhou State had been smashed into ruins by the fight between Gu Qianchuan and Li Tianlan. Li Qingcheng subconsciously turned her head to look back. In the smoke and dust, Li Tianlan and Gu Qianchuan were still fighting. They would not stop until one of them died. Was this Li Tianlan? Li Qingsheng was in a daze. She had always heard that her elder brother was also a young heavenly son in Zhongzhou State. But it seemed that until tonight, she really saw the power of the so-called heavenly son. But she did not understand. The Li family in Zhongzhou State was famous for its sword intents in the dark world. The 24 moves of sword were unparalleled in the world. Chapter 360. It wasn't just Li Qingsheng who was thinking about this. Gu Xingyun and even Gu Qianquan, who was fighting, were confused. Why didn't Li Tianlan draw his sword? The Li family's 24 moves of sword was unparalleled in the world. For hundreds of years in the dark world, in terms of martial arts, the Wang family of Beihai was the well-deserved number one. In terms of swordsmanship, Zhuan Yuantai really outshone others. Kendo could be said to be the soul of the Li family. Whether the successor of the Li family had a sword in his hand or not was a completely different concept and state. After realizing this problem, Gu Xingyun suddenly remembered that Li Tianlan had never drawn his sword at all since he returned after disappearing for 3 years. To severely injure Gu Yulan, he imitated the Great Void sword intent. It was the even more incredible sword of Emperor Path that killed Gu Yunxia. The method of defeating Song Ci was very similar to the myriad Tao collection of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. But what was his true sword intent? Or the 24 moves of sword? Then why not? Gu Xingyun brought Li Qingqing out of the purple gold pavilion. It was also a mess outside the purple gold pavilion. The clear pond became muddy, and the huge rockery was broken in the grass. Gu Xingyun hid behind a cracked rock. He looked indifferent, but his eyes were cold and gloomy. No one could understand the anger and killing intent in his heart at this moment. After becoming the war god of Zhongzhou State for more than 20 years, this was the first time that he was forced to flee and even needed protection. The power of the murderous weapon's frontal attack was completely incredible. Even if he used the improved version of Immortality Potion of Zhongzhou State to stabilize his injury, his body's various functions had declined to the bottom. Unless he was willing to risk his life, otherwise, in his current state, if he was alone, even an ordinary thunder-shocking realm expert could completely kill him. If it weren't for the rumors that he was seriously injured and needed a long time to recuperate, and that he needed to stand up to stabilize the morale of the army, he wouldn't have shown up at all in the final maneuver of the 2 academies. Now he forced himself to come to Huading just to go through the motions. No one thought there was a problem, but just when no one thought there was a problem arose. Li Tianlan, the surviving member of the Li family, actually came to them above board. What did he take Kunlun City for? Gu Xingyun's mind was buzzing. He knew very well what the consequences of tonight's attack would be. For Li Tianlan, as long as he was alive, there would be no consequences. Gu Xingyun was the war god of Zhongzhou State, and Gu Qianquan was also an invincible realm expert on the Holy List. Moreover, he was the helmsman of Kunlun City that Gu Xingyun promoted during his recovery. If they couldn't keep Li Tianlan here tonight, Kunlun City would never disclose this matter. Once the news was leaked, it would prove that Gu Xingyun was seriously injured and Gu Qianquan was not strong enough. At that time, where would the dignity of Kunlun City be? If Li Tianlan escaped unscathed tonight, it would be a slap on his and Gu Qianquan's faces. Not only could they not say anything, but they had to endure it. The most important thing was that if they couldn't keep Li Tianlan tonight and something unexpected happened in the final maneuver, how powerful would Li Tianlan be when he recovered from his injury a few years later? Would he really become an invincible realm expert? The purple gold pavilion shook violently in front of Gu Xingyun and Li Qingqing. Countless cracks appeared on the sturdy walls from the inside to the outside. It looked extremely ugly, as if the beauty had been broken. After controlling Kunlun City for more than 20 years, Gu Xingyun felt genuine fear for the first time. Qianquan, kill him, at any cost. Gu Xingyun suddenly stood up and roared in a voice that was close to a roar. Boom! The entire purple gold pavilion was blasted into pieces by the tremendous power and the majestic sword intent. The roof, the foundation, and the stairs of the 6-story luxurious building seemed to explode at the same time. Rubble flew everywhere, smoke and dust filled the sky, and the surging sword intent swept across the night sky. Storms, frost, flames, and thunderbolts filled every inch of the space. It was the killing intent that spread out after the domain formed by the 10th unique domain was torn apart with indomitable determination. The deep night turned into a world of light in an instant. Wind, frost, lightning, and fire surged everywhere, destroying everything like a storm. In the center of the storm, a mournful blood light rose. The red color was extremely brilliant in the chaotic and trance light. The snow-like white clothes fell from midair like a meteor, completely out of control, and smashed into the pool. The waves splashed. The waves on the surface of the water shook for a moment and then suddenly calmed down. Li Tianlan emerged from the water, getting higher and higher. He stepped on the water and straightened his body. His white clothes made of cloud silk had countless folds, and his waist was completely cut open. Blood flowed down his waist and soon dyed his thighs red. Li Tianlan moved his neck, expressionless, and walked on the water. Gu Qianchuan's figure reappeared in front of Gu Xingyun. Wind, frost, lightning, and fire flickered around him. But this time, instead of forming a domain, they all turned into gloomy and sharp sword intent all over the sky. He held a black dagger in his hand, and blood was dripping from blade. He looked at Li Tianlan quietly, his eyes full of indifference. "You go first," Gu Qianchuan said calmly. He had already tried his best. The sword just now seemed to hurt Li Tianlan, but he did not dare to be careless, because Li Tianlan had never drawn his sword. In the short fight just now, Gu Qianchuan had roughly figured out Li Tianlan's strength. The essence of Li Tianlan's strength was the real invincible realm, but his own accumulation was far from enough. He had enough quality, but not enough quantity. By the standard of the ordinary invincible realm, Li Tianlan was at most equivalent to half or even 1/3 of the ordinary invincible realm. But 1/3 of the invincible realm was also the invincible realm. In this state, Li Tianlan's short-term outbreak was definitely not inferior to the weakest invincible realm. He was not invincible realm, but he already had the quality of the invincible realm. There were few such examples in the dark world, but there were always some amazing figures who could do it. In the past 3 years in the dark world, there were 3 people who could do it, and all of them were from Zhongzhou State. Such figures could not be called invincible realm experts for the time being, but they had paved the way to enter the invincible realm, so they were called the combat capability of the invincible realm. Tribulation 3 years ago. Dijiang of the Wang family of Beihai in the past 3 years. And Li Tianlan who returned 3 years later. It was all the same. Gu Qianchuan suddenly felt lucky that 3 years had passed. If he had not entered the holy list 3 years ago, he might have been defeated by Li Tianlan today. In Li Tianlan's current state, Gu Qianchuan was confident that he could firmly suppress him. The sword stroke just now was proof. But if such a figure went crazy, Gu Qianchuan also had concerns. At least he could not be sure that he could absolutely guarantee Gu Xingyun's safety, because Li Tianlan had never drawn his sword. After 3 years, Li Tianlan had never shown his own sword intent. Gu Qianchuan was almost sure. Li Tianlan's sword intent was no longer the 24 moves of sword. Although the 24 moves of sword was strong, it was not worth hiding. There was no doubt that he hid his sword to deal with Gu Xingyun at the most critical moment. As long as Gu Xingyun left first, he could really kill Gu Qianchuan freely. "Are you sure?" Gu Xingyun asked. Gu Qianchuan thought, "How could I be sure? I still don't know how strong the sword intent of this little monster is." The waves in the pool fell down and calmed down in an instant. Li Tianlan began to speed up. His white clothes were stained with blood, but his speed did not slow down. He was extremely fast and light. In a trance, he was like a breeze. 30%. The corner of Gu Qianchuan's mouth twitched. As soon as he finished speaking, the wind, frost, lightning, and fire around him surged again. The sword intent all over the sky with countless brilliance completely shrouded Li Tianlan like a sky curtain. Li Tianlan roared and rushed forward. He stepped out of the water and rushed to the sky. His figure was like a white rainbow, crashing into the sky curtain. The sky curtain, full of violent sword intent, was directly torn by his body. Li Tianlan's movements were getting faster and faster. Wherever his white clothes passed, all he brought was the simplest speed and strength. It was a kind of bravery and fearlessness that caused one's mind to tremble. Gu Xingyan took a look at Li Qingsheng and turned to leave without hesitation. The elites of Kunlun City stationed in the purple gold pavilion finally reacted. Several specially modified black Mercedes-Benz quickly drove over. Dozens of elites rushed to the purple gold pavilion from all directions. Some of them rushed to Li Tianlan. The other part escorted Gu Xingyan to leave Winter Mountain. Gu Xingyan got into a Mercedes-Benz. Several Mercedes-Benz formed a motorcade and left the purple gold pavilion at full speed. The purple gold pavilion had become a ruin. The smoke and dust had not yet dissipated. The sword intent around Gu Qianchuan had suddenly condensed to the limit. The white clothes that tore the sky curtain came to Gu Qianchuan. It was still a punch that was not flashy, but filled with extreme violence. Gu Qianchuan grinned and did not retreat at all. He punched with surging sword intent. The piercingly cold wind was silent. The cold and hot alternated in the wind. The fire and frost completely disappeared. Only the extremely cold and hot wind were turbulent. Gu Qianchuan's whole body lit up. A touch of blue appeared in the whistling wind. The blue light flickered slightly and then bloomed under the starry sky in the most ferocious manner. All the frost, lightning, and fire were condensed in the blue light arc. Every ray of light was sword intent and power. Thousands of sword intents broke out at the same time, like a mountain flood. This was the most balanced and perfect unique technique of Kunlun City, 10 skills of true martial arts. This was the peak use of 10 skills of true martial arts by Gu Qianchuan. It was the integration of several unique techniques at the same time. It was his strongest move. The 8th Supreme Sword Dance and the 5 Elements Extermination were in full bloom in the 10th unique domain. The brilliant sword light completely took away the brilliance of the night sky. The surging and endless light swallowed Li Tianlan in an instant. Where Gu Qianchuan's fist wind went, all the sword light seemed to be guided and burst out. The punch with the ultimate sword intent collided with Li Tianlan's fist. A natural air wave suddenly appeared in the ruins of the purple gold pavilion. Wherever the air wave passed, the ruins of the purple gold pavilion completely turned into smoke and dust. Li Tianlan's white clothes were completely broken, and he was covered in blood. The surging sword light completely wrapped him. His body was completely out of balance, and he was blasted into the distance. Gu Qianchuan's figure staggered and took a deep breath. He was unable to chase in a short time. He did not look upset, but only a sneer. The place where Li Tianlan landed was where the elites of Kunlun City gathered in the purple gold pavilion. There were nearly 20 people. 1 was in the thunder-shocking realm, 5 were in the fire-flaming realm, and the others were at least in the ice-condensing realm. This kind of strength was indeed ordinary. But the most desirable place of Kunlun City's martial arts was the sword formation. The unique technique could form a sword formation. The 20 elites could naturally form a formation. Li Tianlan's figure fell, and the place where the elites of Kunlun City gathered lit up with fire. Gu Qianchuan took a deep breath and rushed over without hesitation. Li Tianlan wanted to kill Gu Xingyan. Tonight was an opportunity. Kunlun City wanted to kill Li Tianlan. In this situation, it was also an opportunity. The best opportunity. The 20 elites of Kunlun City gathered in one place. Frost and flames shone above Li Tianlan. The thunder-shocking realm expert at the forefront was all blue. The blue electric arc blended into the fire and disappeared in an instant. All the icicles and coldness merged into the fire and disappeared in an instant. In the crowd, only the fire was fiercely moving and burning the sky. All the sword intent of Gu Qianchuan completely disappeared after the outbreak. Li Tianlan's figure fell into the fire. The fire burned and twisted the air. His figure became a little blurred. Gu Qianchuan's cold eyes showed a hint of a smile, and the sword intent rose again. No matter how exquisite the sword formation formed by 20 elites was, it was difficult to threaten Li Tianlan, even if he was seriously injured. But the sword body formed by 20 elite cannon fodder was enough to make Li Tianlan's injury more serious. Gu Qianchuan could be sure that with such a serious injury, Li Tianlan would die tonight. Li Tianlan's body completely fell into the fire. Crack! There was a slight crisp sound in the night. It was like the sound of metal colliding. It was also like the long sword was unsheathed. The sound was very light, but it was so slight. In a trance, Gu Qianchuan heard Li Tianlan's gentle, weak, but extremely loud heartbeat. The long sword was unsheathed. The smile on his face suddenly froze. The sword light in the purple-gold pavilion dissipated, the starry sky dimmed, and the fire disappeared. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, without any strange phenomenon. Gu Qianchuan did not react at all. Not far away, the sword formation formed by the elites of Kunlun City had suddenly dissipated without a trace. There was really no trace. Along with the fire, the 20 elites of Kunlun City also dissipated. There was no blood, no screams, and even no dust. The fire, the crowd, and everything seemed to have never existed. In an instant, they became complete nothingness. The ruins suddenly became incomparably quiet. The world was quiet. Gu Qianchuan stood stiffly in place. He looked at the scene in front of him incredulously and even blinked. This feeling was like a dream. The fire that symbolized Li Tianlan's death disappeared. The elites of Kunlun City disappeared, and Li Tianlan also disappeared. What sword intent was this? Was it sword intent? Gu Qianchuan was suddenly shocked. It was not until this time that he realized something. Li Tianlan disappeared. He was not here, and he was not dead. Where could he go? Gu Qianchuan's scalp was completely numb in an instant. His heart was cold and numb. He was definitely stronger than Li Tianlan. But when he had the upper hand, he did not watch Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan got rid of him and disappeared. How could Gu Xingyun survive? He was crazy, stupid, and panicked. Gu Qianchuan's mind was in a mess for a moment, and he was even at a loss. Gu Xingyun must not die. At the very least, he cannot die now. That was why he and Gu Xingyun could trust each other. Gu Xingyun, who was seriously injured, still ranked 5th on the divine list. He had enough strength to match the title of the war god of Zhongzhou State. It was extremely important for Kunlun City. If Gu Xingyun died, Gu Qianchuan could not defend Kunlun City at all. He must not die. Gu Qianchuan, who was extremely confused, suddenly turned around and was about to rush in the direction of Gu Xingyun's retreat at all costs. A drop of blood fell in front of him. Gu Qianchuan was stunned and a little confused. Another drop of blood fell. I am injured, he thought blankly. Why don't I remember? In a mess, he saw the 3rd drop of blood. Gu Qianchuan's body shook violently, and he completely reacted. He did not know that he was injured, so he was naturally not injured. This blood was not his. Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan. Gu Qianchuan suddenly raised his head. A silver light suddenly appeared in the starry night sky. It was the most brilliant silver that Gu Qianchuan had ever seen in his life. It was gorgeous, vivid, dreamy, but with indescribable fierceness. The silver light sprinkled down like stars falling one after another. There was a hand with a silver bracelet above Gu Qianchuan. The silver bracelet had completely unfolded at this time and turned into a long sword. Falling stars. The bloody palm held the hilt of the long sword. The silver light was so brilliant and so illusory. The moment Gu Qianchuan raised his head, the falling stars' swords suddenly stabbed down. There was no wind, thunder, lightning, or fire. Even the air did not have the slightest change. The silver light gathered. The falling stars stabbed straight. A sword was a sword. A pure sword, a real sword, an illusory sword. A sword was a sword without any superfluous meaning. Wherever the swift and fierce sword light passed, there was no sound. There was only destruction left. This sword was so perfect. Gu Qianchuan, who was anxious and confused, did not have the slightest defense. The silver sword light was getting closer and closer. Gu Qianchuan suddenly let out the most miserable scream in his life. The silent and empty void domain instantly rose. The next second, the silver light almost pierced the void without any stagnation and continued to fall silently. The bloody light in the sky rose, solidified, and floated in the torn void. In a crazy scream, the power of the invincible realm on Mount Dong broke out completely. The endless light covered everything. An arm flew directly into the sky in the bloody rain. Blood spilled. Gu Qianchuan no longer cared about Gu Xingyun. Without hesitation, he fled in the opposite direction of Gu Xingyun. His arm rushed for a distance in the air and then floated in the broken void. The silver sword light slowly converged. The sword intent swept over, and the void disappeared. Gu Qianchuan's arm also disappeared completely, as if it had never existed. The white shadow full of blood flashed in the air. Without hesitation, it directly rushed in the direction of Gu Xingyun's departure. Li Tianlan did not know how strong he was, but he knew very well that if it was a life-and-death fight, he would not be Gu Qianchuan's opponent. Even if Gu Qianchuan was the last on the holy list, he could not win. This was a very obvious matter. So he did not hide anything at all and directly told Lin Yuxian his thoughts. After 3 years of great achievements and returning to Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan's biggest trump card was the sword intent that he had never shown to the world. The most intangible sword intent. This was also the core of this plan. When Gu Xingyun came to Huading, he took Gu Qianchuan with him, which was equivalent to taking the core protection force of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan wanted to kill Gu Xingyun. He was not Gu Qianchuan's opponent, but he thought that he was not far from Gu Qianchuan. So he and Lin Yuxian appeared on Mount Dong. The plan was actually very simple. Li Tianlan was sure that as long as he gave Gu Qianchuan enough pressure, Gu Xingyun would definitely retreat alone according to his character. This was not only because of Gu Xingyun's caution. At the same time, it was also because Li Tianlan was absolutely sure of his value. The more powerful he was, the more Kunlun City wanted to kill him. As long as he vaguely showed the strength to compete with Gu Qianchuan, Gu Xingyun would definitely let Gu Qianchuan attack him at all costs. He retreated first, not only for the sake of safety, but also for the finishing work after his death. So Li Tianlan never drew his sword from beginning to end, even if he was seriously injured. He wanted Gu Xingyun to retreat alone when he showed his strength. At the same time, he was reluctant to give up this opportunity to leave Gu Qianchuan to kill him. As soon as Gu Xingyun left, he began to draw his sword. Li Tianlan's plan was to use the intangible sword intent to temporarily get rid of Gu Qianchuan's sight and take advantage of Gu Qianchuan's confusion to launch a sneak attack and severely injure or even kill Gu Qianchuan. As for Gu Xingyun would feel that no one in Zhongzhou State dared to kill him, and it would not take too long for Gu Qianchuan to return to him. So he withdrew easily and decisively. He was right. No one in Zhongzhou State dared to kill Gu Xingyun, even the Wang family of Beihai. But there was an heir of the Lin clan beside Li Tianlan. On the top of Mount Dong, when Lin Yuxian saw the black Mercedes-Benz leave Purple Gold Pavilion, he already knew that Li Tianlan's plan had succeeded, and it was very successful. He did not know whether Li Tianlan could use his sword intent to severely injure Gu Qianchuan. But to do this, Lin Yuxian had to carry out his task. In the plan, after Li Tianlan severely injured or killed Gu Qianchuan, he would meet him as soon as possible. The two of them would join hands to kill the war god of Zhongzhou State. The plan was halfway through. Lin Yuxian had no reason to retreat. He did not want to make trouble, but he was never afraid of it. The Mercedes-Benz went down the mountain road and was getting closer to the road under his feet. Lin Yuxian stood up and silently adjusted the machine gun beside him. Or it was something like a machine gun. This was a weapon fixed on the top of the mountain. Its shape was similar to a multi-barrel machine gun, but its caliber was 6 or 7 times larger than that of an ordinary machine gun. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a machine gun. A large string of bullets hung on the weapon. This kind of bullets, together with a machine gun, had never been in service in any country's army in the world. The code name was Rainstorm, and the bullets were all small armor-piercing shells. This was a surprise for Gu Xingyun. The Mercedes-Benz team was getting closer and closer. Lin Yuxian grinned and held the body of Rainstorm. "It's really exciting," he whispered to himself, and aimed the muzzle at the motorcade on the road down the mountain. At a distance of nearly 800 meters, he fired directly. There was a sudden thunder on the top of Mount Dong. The dazzling and horrible nightmare-like tongue of fire swallowed wildly. Hundreds of small armor-piercing shells rushed out of the muzzle and poured out almost crazily. Rainstorm fired at the top of the mountain. For a time, the violent gunshots almost filled the entire Mount Dong. The specially modified Mercedes-Benz motorcade was completely in chaos. The bodies, roofs, and windows were broken under the pouring of the armor-piercing shells. 2 Mercedes-Benz rolled down the mountain at the first time. After the explosion, they turned into a towering fire wave. The Mercedes-Benz in the middle lit up at the first time. The fire lit up inside the Mercedes-Benz, but it quietly filled the space outside and wrapped the entire car body. Rainstorm was still pouring wildly. Countless bullets were melted by the fire, and a small number of bullets hit the specially modified Mercedes-Benz. The Mercedes-Benz was bumpy, but it still accelerated forward. "It's a little interesting," Lin Yuxian said with a smile, and smashed the Rainstorm in his hand, which was about to run out of bullets. He began to stride along the top of the mountain. One car and one person were completely parallel on the top of the mountain and the road. The Mercedes-Benz was getting faster and faster. Lin Yuxian stretched his body and took a step forward. Then he jumped directly from the top of the mountain, which was hundreds of meters high. The Mercedes-Benz was surrounded by fire. Lin Yuxian's body lit up with lightning. His figure jumped for the top of the mountain and landed directly on the roof of the car with a bang. The body of the Mercedes-Benz was almost completely deformed under the impact of the distance, but it still rushed forward without stopping. Lin Yuxian sneered and directly pulled out a soft sword from his waist. The soft sword was completely straight as steel in the trembling. Lin Yuxian inserted the sword into the roof of the car. Vaguely, a woman's scream came from the car below. Lin Yuxian inserted the sword into the roof of the car to fix his position. He leaned forward and smashed the thick bulletproof glass with a bang. His hand went straight down from the windshield and held the steering wheel. Hard. Crack. The Mercedes-Benz continued to rush forward at a speed of more than 120 kilometers per hour, but Lin Yuxian directly pulled the steering wheel off. The car tilted on a mountain road and hit the car next to it at a super high speed. The whole car exploded in the violent collision. In the fire, Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, escaped from the Mercedes-Benz with Li Qingsheng. Lin Yuxian quietly floated above the 2 people, expressionless. The software in his hand shook gently and then became straight again. A dim yellow color spread to the sword edge. Suddenly, the sword intent around Lin Yuxian soared into the sky. 9th blade, dusk. There was no hesitation. No hesitation. The dim yellow sword light swept across the valley. Lin Yuxian and the sword united and rushed straight to Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun's eyes were cold and angry. As soon as his body moved, Li Qingsheng beside him suddenly screamed, "No!" She directly stood in front of Gu Xingyun and opened her hands. "No!" Gu Xingyun suddenly roared recklessly. Lin Yuxian instinctively withdrew the sword, but it was completely too late. Chapter 361. There was a big chapter at 12 o'clock last night. Don't miss it. That chapter was yesterday. The wreckage of the car explosion was still burning. The blazing flame and the dim sword intent merged perfectly. The night faded away in the sword intent, and the mountain road became clear. Time seemed to slow down all of a sudden. Gu Xingyun's roar was lengthened countless times, and all the sounds seemed to emerge bit by bit, messy and broken. The sharp sword gradually moved forward in the dim light. Li Qingqing's mind was full of all the fragments of her life that had just begun. From small to large, from far to near, it became clearer and clearer. She knew that her father didn't like her when she was very young. She was the only daughter of Gu Xingyun, the god of war in Zhongzhou state. She had a noble identity, but she had almost never received the favor she should have enjoyed. In her childhood memory, in addition to the indifference between her parents, all her impressions were the never-ending snow outside Kunlun City. Her mother often sat in her room, motionless. Everyone in the Gu family looked at her with complicated eyes. Her half-brother seemed to always dislike her, and her father, who was closest to her, was also lukewarm to her. In Li Qingqing's memory, her father seemed to have only held her a few times since she was a child. When she called him, he would nod, smile when he was in a good mood, and touch her head when he was in a better mood. Sometimes he would ask her what she wanted. This happened very rarely, so Li Qingqing asked for a lot every time. Gu Xingyan also agreed indifferently, and then brought her all the things she wanted every time. On her birthday, when she was 8 years old, Gu Xingyun asked her again what she wanted. She thought for a long time, and then carefully said that she wanted to practice martial arts. So after that day, she had a few super famous teachers even in the whole dark world, and she began to get in touch with Kunlun City's 10 skills of true martial arts. Gu Xingyan never refused her request. That kind of silent promise was deep and gentle. But most of the time, his performance had been calm and indifferent. Li Qingsheng could always sense the huge gap between her and her father. All the care and doting from him were hesitant and tangled. Even the occasional tenderness seemed so unfamiliar. It was not that Li Qingsheng had never been wronged, but as she grew older, she became more and more indifferent to this matter. There might be many stories between her parents, but no matter whether those stories were happy or sad, gratitude or hatred, no matter how distant the relationship between father and daughter was, as a father, he had given his daughter everything she wanted since she was young. He had never been stingy. The long sword with the dim yellow sword intent moved forward with an indomitable will. Countless scenes flashed in Li Qingqing's mind, from the beginning to the end, and from the beginning to the end. Li Qingqing suddenly laughed. She suddenly remembered her birthday when she was 9. On that day, her eldest brother, who had always disliked her since she was a child, directly threw the birthday cake prepared for her by Kunlun City on the ground. At the same time, he tore a plush toy given to her by her mother. Seeing this scene, her father did not say a word. Instead, he slapped her eldest brother and sent him flying. The reason why Li Qingsheng remembered this scene was not because of the joy she felt when she saw her elder brother being beaten, but because her father said something very calmly while waiting for her elder brother, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth. No matter what, she is still your sister. Li Qingsheng wanted to look back at Gu Xingyan, but her thinking was too fast and her movements were too slow. She had no time to turn her head, so naturally, she could not see Gu Xingyan's expression. This man, who had been worthy of Zhongzhou State and Kunlun City for many years, might have many mistakes and even sins. But from the standpoint of Kunlun City, no one was qualified to say that Gu Xingyan was a bad person. No matter what, he was also her father. So when the sword light fell, she pounced on it. Without hesitation, the long sword penetrated her chest. The 9th blade, dusk. But dusk was not warm. Instead, it was bitterly cold. The fragmented syllables in Gu Xingyun's throat finally converged into a word. No! It seemed that it was not until the moment when Li Qingchang rushed up to stand in front of him that Gu Xingyun really realized how important this daughter was in his heart. He also liked Li Qingchang before, but it was a kind of restrained and reserved love. This kind of love did not affect him to exchange Li Qingchang for the benefits that Kunlun City needed, because she was Li Shi's daughter. Gu Xingyan also liked Li Shi, but he felt that Li Shi was dirty. Gu Xingyan would not hesitate to exchange her daughter for some things. But it was not until this delicate figure stood in front of him that he completely understood that Li Qingcheng was not only Li Shi's daughter, but also his own blood. And this time, what Li Qingcheng exchanged for was his life. It was best to be alive. So, he made a profit. But why was his heart so painful? Gu Xingyun's voice was loud and hoarse. This word was shouted so hastily and mournfully that his throat was hurt when he spoke, making a bloody taste in his throat. Gu Xingyun stood up straight. At the moment when Lin Yuxian intended to withdraw his sword but instinctively stabbed forward, Gu Xingyun pulled Li Qingsheng and took a step back. A sea of rage suddenly appeared on the burning mountain road. Before all the sword intent at dusk could take effect in Li Qingsheng's body, it was shattered by the sea of rage that suddenly appeared. The sea of rage roared, and the majestic and incredible sword intent surged and gathered in an instant. Gu Xingyun's face was pale, but the sea of rage that gathered in the sky in an instant had unparalleled anger and majesty. This was Gu Xingyun's sword intent. In a desperate situation, Gu Xingyun almost desperately restored part of his strength. The sword intent all over the sky became extremely solid and sticky. The sea of rage composed of sword intent covered the night sky, as if the whole world was oppressing Lin Yuxian's living space. Gu Xingyun held his daughter and took a step forward. The sea of rage in the air suddenly surged. Under the night sky, there seemed to be the undulating sound of the tide, rising and falling on Winter Mountain. In front of Lin Yuxian, huge waves hundreds of meters high, with cold, killing intent hit Lin Yuxian mercilessly. This was the riot of the whole sea of rage, with suffocating despair and oppression. Under the huge waves, Lin Yuxian's long sword pierced straight into the sky. For the first time, there was a touch of ruthlessness in his eyes that did not match his gentle appearance. The huge waves with infinite sword intent hit down extremely quickly and violently. Lin Yuxian roared. In the sea of rage, thunder suddenly rose. The overwhelming thunder erupted hysterically with Lin Yuxian as the center in an instant. The endless sword intent filled the air and turned into a sea. The sea was turbulent, bringing up wild waves composed of sword intent. Lin Yuxian stood in the middle of the sea of rage and stabbed upward with his sword. The blue light that rose into the sky was sharp and condensed. For a moment, the whole sea of rage seemed to be dyed blue by Lin Yuxian's sword light alone. Gu Xingyun's face suddenly changed. He thought that this young man was just a temporary helper that Li Tianlan found, but he did not expect that the other party would be so powerful. Who was this? With this sword move alone, the other party was enough to be ranked among the young heavenly sons in Zhongzhou State. The sword intent of this sword move was abundant and overbearing. In Gu Xingyun's view, it even surpassed that of his son, Gu Hanzhan. 24 moves of sword. Was there such a figure in the Li family besides Li Tianlan? The infinite thunder light went straight up in the deep sea. The strong and resolute sword light stirred the sea of rage, full of sword intent, and moved forward. Gu Xingyun's face became paler and paler, but he insisted on taking another step forward. The surging sea of rage was completely crazy. The sea water condensed by sword intent smashed toward Lin Yuxian overwhelmingly. Lin Yuxian's blue sword light finally rushed out of the blockade and confinement of the sea of rage and went straight into the sky. The shocking thunder in the ninth heaven. The blue sword light turned into a dangerous pale in an instant. The sound of thunder surged. Wherever the sword energy passed, the dense lightning suddenly covered the night sky. Countless lightning began to gather in one place. Below the sky, above the sea of rage, the lightning that gathered turned into beams of light connecting the sky and the earth. The amazing light rushed directly into the sea of rage with the crazy and broken sword energy. The sea was completely boiling. Gu Xingyun finally recognized this sword move. This was the absolute sword in the 24 moves of sword. 22nd blade, break of the sky. Gu Xingyun suddenly turned his head. In the middle of the sea of rage, the young man who evaporated half of his sword energy was already covered with blood, but he stood straight and did not step back. He was so unyielding. Gu Xingyun's eyes were in a trance, but his killing intent became more determined. Li Tianlan alone had already put pressure on Kunlun City. With this young man, if they grew up, how could Kunlun City survive in the future? The boiling sea of rage shrank in the beam of light that penetrated the sky and the earth. The majestic sea continued to shrink and gather. So the sea became a condensed river, but the sword intent became more and more powerful. Gu Xingyun was desperately trying to improve his strength. He took the third step forward. The raging long river was like a waterfall, rushing directly to Lin Yuxian, who was covered with blood. It was mighty and powerful. It was a fatal blow. Lin Yuxian stared at the long river in the air. Death was approaching, but there was no weakness in his eyes, only high fighting intent. The raging long river boiled and rolled. The sword intent continued to condense, and white waves emerged. The long river poured into the earth from the sky. Lin Yuxian raised the sword in his hand. The sword light did not light up. Gu Xingyun froze for a moment. He suddenly found that his long river of sword intent had completely stopped in the air. How was this possible? Gu Xingyun's brain was in a mess. The long white river was surging, but it no longer moved forward. Gu Xingyun, whose eyes were already in a trance, finally saw the end of the long river. There was a white dot there. It was small and illusory, almost completely integrated with the long white river. That was Bai Yi. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun's somewhat confused eyes instantly became focused and deep. Li Tianlan, who appeared on the battlefield silently, stood in front of Lin Yuxian. His body floated slightly in the air. There was no violent sword intent. He stretched out a hand. A finger moved forward. With just one finger, he directly blocked the whole mighty long river. For the first time, there was a look of horror in Lin Yuxian's eyes. He was not shocked by Li Tianlan's ease. He was very close to Li Tianlan, so he knew the power of Li Tianlan's finger. His movement was very simple, but the power of his whole body seemed to be completely condensed in that finger so that he could block the whole long river. Lin Yuxian could clearly feel that the endless power was consumed in Li Tianlan's body with this stalemate. The speed was getting faster and faster, and it did not stop. But Li Tianlan seemed to be unaware of it. His power had no end at all, and it seemed that he could support any form of consumption. This was not something that could be explained by the wind and thunder veins. Such power was almost far beyond the foundation that the wind and thunder veins brought to the body. Li Tianlan stretched out his finger. The huge consumption of power suddenly began to increase exponentially. At the end of the river, the waves rolled and turned into a huge whirlpool in an instant. Li Tianlan looked at the whirlpool in front of him with a calm expression. He suddenly smiled and whispered, "Break, break." It was not shattering. It was not breaking. It was breaking the sea. Sea-breaking move. This was the sword intent that had never appeared in the dark world. It was based on the 24 moves of sword, but it was beyond them. This was Li Tianlan's own sword intent. One finger broke the sea. A breeze rose in the night sky. The wind was not fierce, but it was extremely cold. The breeze blew through the river. In an instant, the whole turbulent long river exploded in the wind. The splashes condensed by the sword intent were flying everywhere in the night. The river was scattered in the air. Under the night sky, there were sword intent and splashes everywhere. The long river was divided into two into four into 8, thousands of them, and finally scattered quietly in the night sky. Gu Xingyun stared at Li Tianlan as if he had seen a ghost. One sword broke the sea, but from beginning to end, Gu Xingyun did not see Li Tianlan's sword intent clearly. Illusory, shapeless, and formless. What the hell was this? Li Tianlan looked at Gu Xingyun quietly. Without the obstruction of the long river of sword intent, Gu Xingyun's figure became extremely clear. He strode through the air soundlessly and without any aura. However, he carried with him an extreme sense of danger. Li Tianlan, how dare you kill me? Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and suddenly shouted angrily. Have you ever thought about the consequences? Li Tianlan didn't bother to talk at all and just moved forward. He came to kill. Since he could fight, why did he make a fuss? You are forcing me. You are forcing me. Gu Xingyun suddenly became furious. How dare you force me? The quiet night suddenly froze. All the light disappeared completely in an instant. The space within a radius of 100 meters fell into absolute silence in an instant. In the darkness, the violent sword intent surged up and down with tyrannical power, as if to destroy everything. Gu Xingyan finally condensed his domain by force. This was his 10th unique domain. It was also the most authentic 10th unique domain in the whole dark world today. Even if he couldn't exert all his strength now, it was still the most authentic one. Li Qianlan's footsteps finally stopped in the 10th unique domain. It was dark in the domain, but his figure was still hovering freely instead of floating out of control. The tyrannical sword intent that pervaded the domain strangled him madly. This was like a real unique domain of its own, without the slightest vitality. In the darkness, Li Tianlan raised his arm. In the domain and sword intent that were colder than the surging momentum, Li Tianlan's palm suddenly burst out a pure light. The dazzling light was released to the extreme in his hand, illuminating the void. His blood-stained, broken white clothes became extremely real in an instant in the 10th unique domain. Illusory domain, illusory sword intent. Only he was real. Only light. In an instant, Li Qianlan's aura began to rise wildly, rushed out of the domain, crossed the sky, and reached the starry sky. At this moment, Li Tianlan was still in the domain. But the so-called domain, the so-called winter mountain, and the so-called night all became fake. Only his figure was real. Because it was real, so it looked extremely huge. It was as if the whole world was under his feet. Finally, sword intent appeared in Li Qianlan's hand. He raised his arm. His movement was neither fast nor slow, but it seemed as if it was natural for him to stretch his arm. All the light in his hand turned into sword intent, which could really tear the sky. The sword was a killing weapon. It could kill people, break the sea, and naturally, it could cut the sky. Cutting the sky. Only his own sword intent was the most suitable for him. The most suitable and the strongest. The dazzling light completely bloomed in Li Qianlan's hand. One finger broke the sea. One sword cut the sky. The 10th unique domain began to shake fiercely. The darkness receded, and the whole domain completely melted where the light spread. Gu Xingyun's eyes lit up. It was a battle of life and death, but his eyes were intoxicated. He finally saw Li Qianlan's sword intent. Even if it was only one move, it caused an extremely violent impact on his heart. This was the road of the Chosen One. This was the sword of the Chosen One. Martial arts, martial arts. If ordinary people's martial arts were still in the category of martial arts, the so-called road of the Chosen One was equivalent to entering the domain of Tao. The gorgeous and dangerous light was still blooming. Gu Xingyun seemed to see a real new world. Vaguely, he saw a more powerful road, and he really saw the gap between him and a few people like Wang Tianzong. This was what he had been dreaming of. Gu Xingyan breathed quickly. He was sure that if he could survive tonight and had a few years to recover, he could definitely make further progress within 10 years. Even if he could not surpass Wang Tianzong, he could almost reach the level of that god. The 10th unique domain was still shaking. Gu Xingyun's desire to win was stronger than ever. He spat out a mouthful of blood, held his daughter in his arms tightly, and suddenly roared. In the domain that was on the verge of collapse, countless sword intents suddenly exploded. No matter how highly Tianlan's swordsmanship and sword intent were, absolute quantity could still make up for the lack of quality. The light blooming in Li Qianlan's hand was suppressed again. Gu Xingyun kept moving, and the 10th unique domain, which had been almost destroyed, expanded again. In the darkness, the extreme light lit up again, with a cold snort from Li Tianlan. The light that was enough to tear the sky suddenly radiated and soared. The expanded 10th unique domain and the light completely blended. There was a sudden silence in the night. The darkness and the light completely blended together, collapsing and shrinking silently. Then there was a loud noise that resounded through the whole winter mountain. After the loud noise, the domain and the sword light dissipated at the same time. Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood and slowly stood up straight. The field became quiet again. Lin Yuxian sat alone on the ground, and his face was pale. However, Gu Xingyun had already taken Li Qingqing away at top speed after the final outbreak. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, clenched his fists tightly, and did not speak. The sirens and flashing lights at the foot of the mountain lit up at the same time. The garrison of Huading and the police arrived at Winter Mountain almost at the same time. Chapter 362. Second update. After midnight, when Li Tianlan carried Lin Yuxian, who was seriously injured and weak, into the Silver Lake Villa in Winter Mountain, the police station and garrison of Huading had almost surrounded the entire Winter Mountain. Warning lights flashed all over the mountain, and a large number of troops occupied every passage up and down mountain. The atmosphere was grim and dignified. Li Tianlan entered the villa, closed the door, and put Lin Yuxian on the sofa. Tianlan, is this the property of the Li family? Lin Yuxian leaned stiffly on the sofa, and his arms trembled unconsciously. It was crazy enough to fight against the god of war of Zhongzhou State with the strength close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, even if the god of war of Zhongzhou State was seriously injured and his strength was greatly reduced. The reason why the 22nd blade was called one of the 24 moves of sword was that the sword energy was extremely strong, but it also meant the greatest consumption. In Lin Yuxian's current realm, such a sword move was absolutely forced. Once the 22nd blade was used, Gu Xingyun would be seriously injured by his own sword intent, even if he didn't do anything. Lin Yuxian's body almost collapsed when he was caught between Gu Xingyun and his own sword intent. If Li Tianlan arrived a few seconds later, the young heavenly son of the Lin clan might really die on the spot tonight. It's my first time here. Li Tianlan rummaged out a medicine box and said flatly, "The nominal owner of the villa belongs to a Germanic businessman. Clip Jason Andres. It seems to be this name. A Germanic businessman with no special background. His real identity is the supermaster in Samsara Palace, second only to military counselor and saint. His code name is General." In other words, this was Qin Weibai's property. Qin Weibai had 9 properties in Huading, and there were 2 mansions on Winter Mountain that cost more than 9 figures. The villa in Silver Lake was one of them. When Qin Weibai first appeared around him 3 years ago, she collected his fingerprints. With his fingerprints, Li Tianlan could enter and exit all her properties at will. When the army surrounded Winter Mountain, the Silver Lake Villa area, where the rich gathered and the great hidden power, was the best hiding place. "Oh, General, I've heard of it." Lin Yuxian whistled, but his smile was already a little forced. His face was pale. Because of excessive blood loss, his body became extremely cold, and his teeth began to tremble uncontrollably. Li Tianlan frowned and waved his hand. Silently, Lin Fengting's broken clothes disappeared without a trace. F***ck me. Lin Yuxian's face changed. He took a deep breath and said in shock, "What are you doing?" F***ck your sister. Apply the medicine. Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. "Lie down. If you don't stop bleeding, you won't be able to see the sun tomorrow." "Damn you. My sister is only 17 this year." Lin Yuxian gnashed his teeth. "Don't even think about it. Get lost." Li Tianlan laughed and scolded him. He applied some extremely expensive hemostatic medicine with a special formula to Lin Yuxian's badly mutilated back, and then threw the medicine directly to him. "If you can move, get up and apply the medicine by yourself." Lin Yuxian, who had goosebumps all over his body, hummed and climbed up and applied the ointment with trembling hands. Li Tianlan rummaged through the medicine box again and threw 2 bottles of internal healing potions at her. "You should also have healing potions, right? It's all destroyed." Lin Yuxian said angrily, "Damn it. Even if it is not destroyed, everything will be gone when you wave your hand, just now." Li Tianlan smiled, took off his severely damaged white clothes, and moved his body. "I'll stay here for the next few days. I don't have Zhongzhou state nationality. Even if I did, I couldn't go to the final maneuver to help you." Lin Yuxian was silent for a while and suddenly said, All right. Li Tianlan put the white clothes in his hand on the sofa beside him and sat down. The bloodstains on his body slowly stopped, and intense pain began to spread from every corner of his body. Lin Yoshin's face was a little pale, but he was relieved. He could feel anything, even if it was pain. It was much better than being numb. He quietly recalled the collision of his sword with Gu Xingyun tonight. The sea in the 10th unique domain. The light after shattering the heavens. The light and the sea intertwined and surged. The entire scene was constantly being broken down. The sea became sword intent, and the light also became sword intent. The scene became clearer and clearer. Every time the sword intent trembled, it was like a spiritual light that attacked his soul. Lin Yuxian was in a trance. The sword intent kept replaying in his mind. The clear sword intent once again became the sea and the light. He suddenly remembered a saying. The mountain was a mountain, and the water was water. The mountain was not a mountain, and the water was not water. The mountain was still a mountain, and the water was still water. In the sword intent that had become the light and the sea again, the white clothes suddenly appeared in the middle of the light and the sea. He himself was like the sword intent, but also like nothingness. He gently pointed, one finger to break the sea. Lin Yuxian was suddenly shocked, and his closed eyes opened again. It was not until he recalled that moment in his mind that he suddenly found that Li Tianlan's state at that moment was so deep and vast. He suddenly appeared in the sword intent of shattering the heavens and the 10th unique domain silently. Existence had form, but Lin Yuxian couldn't tell the form of Li Tianlan's existence at that moment. He was nothingness like a sword intent, but also like the air. He clearly existed, but there was no trace. Lin Yuxian took a deep breath. From the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm to the peak, he had been stuck for 2 years. Tonight, there seemed to be an extremely huge opportunity. He hesitated for a moment, but still asked, Tianlan, what realm are you in now? I don't know. Li Tianlan shook his head. It can be regarded as the invincible realm, but it can also be regarded as no realm. My path is different from yours, so it's hard to give me an accurate position in the chi-controlling realm, the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, the thunder-shocking realm, the half-step invincible realm, and even the invincible realm. The realm is fake, and it's good that my combat capability is there. A completely different path. Lin Yuxian froze for a moment. He knew that Li Tianlan's path was different from today's martial arts, but the so-called different and completely different were two different concepts. All of Lin Yoshin's words were stuck in his throat. How precious was a completely different path of martial arts. It seemed that the relationship between him and Li Tianlan was not enough to share such a secret. Li Tianlan didn't mind this. The Lin clan and the Li family were of the same origin, and they stood together this time. When Lin Yuxian needed to answer questions, he didn't mind saying more. Since he made basic level of martial arts, there were really few young people who were qualified to discuss martial arts with him. The most tragic thing was that they were all enemies. Lin Yuxian was undoubtedly the best topic. What is martial arts? Li Tianlan looked at Lin Yuxian and asked seriously. Martial arts is the sword. Lin Yuxian answered without hesitation. Li Tianlan smiled, and his eyes were warm. There was no doubt that this was the Lin clan's martial arts philosophy. Because they were of the same origin, this was also the Li family's martial arts philosophy. In the hearts of the Li family and the Lin clan, the so-called martial arts were swords. This is our internal statement. In the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City, there are also different opinions among them. Li Tianlan smiled and said, in the Wang family of Beihai, martial arts is about breaking out. In Kunlun City, martial arts is the formation, which is the essence of our unique skills. In the eyes of many people who don't have powerful legacies, the so-called martial arts is the rise of realms. What's wrong with that? Lin Yuxian wondered. That's right. Li Tianlan nodded. We just have different ideas. In my opinion, the so-called martial Tao is invincibility. Only invincibility. The martial way was invincible. Lin Yuxian shuddered all over. Sword chi, explosiveness, sword formations, and the pursuit of a higher level. They are all correct, but they are all fake. Isn't our ultimate goal of practicing martial arts to be invincible in the world? If we don't even have this goal with such courage, even if we practice martial arts, we can only be non-entities. So martial arts is the combat capability, invincibility. We pursue sword intent, the Wong family of Beihai pursues explosiveness, and Kunlun City pursues sword formations. Our absolute arts all have their own essence. Unlike most people who only pursue realms, our battle prowess can far surpass others of the same realm. We have enough confidence to laugh at them because they only care about pursuing realms and don't seriously temper themselves. This is putting the cart before the horse. Li Tianlan said calmly. In fact, it's quite ridiculous. When we laughed at them before, why didn't we reflect on ourselves? Sword intent is the essence of the Li family and the Lin clan. It is the key to the road to invincibility left by the patriarch. The so-called inheritance is just the key. We practice martial arts to be invincible in the world. When we laugh at others for not paying attention to honing themselves, how many people have thought about whether we have forgotten our original intention? Sword intent is our essence, but we've always pursued pure sword intent, and we've limited ourselves. Is the martial arts we pursue sword intent? Ridiculous. It is invincibility. From the beginning to the end, it should be invincibility. Sword intent is just an inheritance. It is not a goal we pursue, but a tool on the way to our pursuit of invincibility. The Lin clan and the Li family never lack talented people, and so does the Wong family of Beihai. Why haven't we had a chosen one with real absolute dominance in the dark world for hundreds of years? That's because in the process of gradually becoming stronger, they all got into a dead end and couldn't get out. Lin Yoxian's face became paler. He should have been extremely cold due to excessive blood loss, but now his head was full of cold sweat. He suddenly remembered the thought that almost made him break through just now. In his memory, Gu Xingyun's 10th unique domain, his break of the sky, all of them were sword intent. Only sword intent. Martial arts. He also got into a dead end of pursuing sword intent. As his sword intent grew stronger, his martial arts seemed to be farther and farther away from him. Lin Fengting's face was completely pale. I also use a sword, Li Tianlan whispered, but in my opinion, my sword is a sword. Without a sword, I can use a saber. Without a saber, I can kill people with my fists. There is no right or wrong in martial arts. You have a great reason, but you can't be invincible in the world. That's wrong. You don't know shit, but you will be invincible in the world in the end. That's right. In the so-called martial arts, strength is supreme. Isn't that so? What is your current kendo? Lin Yuxian recalled Li Tianlan's sword intent. The Li family's sword intent was sharp and fierce, while the Wang family of Beihai's sword intent was turbulent and explosive. What about Li Tianlan? His sword intent was incomparably illusory, but it was extremely real. Heaven-cutting style, sea-breaking style. Whether it was real or illusory, in terms of conception, it seemed to be a notch higher than sharpness and explosive. What is kendo? Li Tianlan laughed, and his voice was extremely firm. Kendo is kendo. That's all. From simplicity to complexity, from complexity to simplicity, returning to simplicity. The mountain was still the mountain, and the water was still the water. To be specific, my path is different from yours. My path starts with the invincible realm. I was like a sudden thunder at the age of 17 and recultivated. At the age of 19, I temporarily entered the invincible realm and made great achievements. I have experienced the scenery of the 4 realms of martial arts and the invincible realm, which is also a very precious wealth. It is also the foundation of my invincible realm, so recultivation is still a realm. Li Tianlan whispered, if I really want to divide my martial arts into realms, I would like to call my 2 recultivation Nirvana realm. That is, the foundation of the invincible realm. If the foundation is solid, I need to accumulate power and pursue the momentum of the invincible realm. After the general trend is formed, it is time to ask the heart. With the heart of the invincible realm, the essence, chi, and spirit are completely condensed, and that is the final detachment. Martial arts itself depends on itself. The foundation of the invincible realm. The momentum of the invincible realm. The heart of the invincible realm. Finally, it transcended. At that time, Lin Yuxian muttered to himself, "At that time, can I still be in the invincible realm?" Chapter 363. Lin Yuxian did not deny this. Li Tianlan's martial arts were clearly in front of him. If Li Tianlan was right, when he reached the end, he would be truly invincible in the world. What he wanted was the real invincibility, not the simple invincible realm. This was Li Tianlan's boldness. Lin Yuxian could not speak for a long time. Li Tianlan said a lot, but compared with martial arts, it was very little, but the impact on him was unparalleled. Martial arts, sword intent, inheritance, unique skills, invincibility. All kinds of concepts were so clear that the opportunity for him to break through the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was right in front of him. This opportunity was even enough to affect his road to the invincible realm in the future. This was the grandest and most distant martial arts. Heaven and earth were like a cage. Even if one was invincible, it was difficult to transcend. Only the real transcendence could be called Tao. "Thank you." Lin Yuxian looked at Li Tianlan and said seriously. His eyes were a little complicated and self-deprecating. There were young chosen ones in Zhongzhou State, and naturally there were also in Europe and America. This small circle of young and top people almost represented the top combat capability of the Dark World in the next few decades. Lin Yuxian thought that he was not worse than anyone, but at this time, he suddenly felt a little ridiculous, including himself. When all of them were confident that they could become the chosen one of the generation, they did not even figure out martial arts. How ridiculous was that? Lin Yuxian vaguely seemed to see his own path, but the real chosen one had already walked on the most correct path and was far ahead of everyone else. He shook his head subconsciously with a complicated mood. "Did you get something?" Li Tianlan asked. Lin Yuxian nodded seriously and said, Li Tianlan laughed and was a little happy. "Come on," he said. It could be foreseen that, with the relationship between the Lin clan and the Li family, Lin Yuxian would be his absolute ally when Qin Weibai controlled the Lin clan in the future. An ally with no problems in terms of combat capability, potential, family background, and position. Lin Yuxian's continuous strength was more in line with Li Tianlan's interests. "So now, is the 24 moves of sword completely useless to you?" Lin Yuxian asked. "How is it possible?" Li Tianlan smiled and said, "Without the 24 moves of sword, I would not have today's sword intent. This supreme art was the best path to invincibility, but it was not the path to becoming a heavenly talent. Back then, our ancestral master was no weaker than a heaven's chosen. That was because this sword Tao was created by him. Since it's self-created, it's naturally the most suitable for me. My sword Tao isn't perfect yet. It only has 9 forms. Cutting the heavens and breaking the seas are among them. There are still 2 comprehensive styles. Everything has just begun. After I perfect it, I don't know whether my kendo will only have 1 style or it will surpass the 24 moves of sword in number." Lin Yuxian nodded thoughtfully. He felt that he had overlooked something, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He turned around and went upstairs. This villa built by the water had not been inhabited for a long time, so it was inevitable that some dust had accumulated in the bedroom. There was a row of men's clothes in the closet, all of which were customized according to Li Tianlan's body shape. They were so new that even the labels were not torn off. Li Tianlan wiped the blood on his body, changed his clothes, went downstairs, and threw another set to Lin Yuxian. "Make do with it. When you get better, I'll buy a suitable one." Lin Yuxian took the clothes and put them on. He tidied up his cuffs, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw Li Tianlan sitting on the sofa, staring at the white clothes. "What a pity," Li Tianlan said softly, his tone full of regret and regret. Cloud silk was a well-deserved treasure in the Dark World. not to mention its function of being warm in winter and cool in summer. Its incredible tenacity was enough to make any master crazy. At least half of the power below the thunder-shocking realm could be resisted by Cloud Silk. Even in the fight with Gu Qianchuan just now, Gu Qianchuan's less than half of the power was neutralized by Cloud Silk. Less than half, it didn't sound much, but it was a battle of the invincible realm. Cloud Silk can be repaired. In terms of the technical level of Zhongzhou State, the Dongxing clan can do this, and it won't take too long. About a month should be enough. Lin Yuxian looked at the broken white clothes with some envy. The most precious thing about Cloud Silk was not its tenacious defense, but its rarity. It could only be found by chance. Zhongzhou State was now the world's most powerful country, with vast land and abundant resources. But there were only 4 clothes made purely of Cloud Silk, not counting Li Tianlan's. They were the 4 spirits' armor, which was famous in the dark world. Samsara Palace had sacrificed a lot of manpower and material resources to get these Cloud Silk, but they gave them to Li Tianlan after getting them. Lin Yuxian was quite envious of Qin Weibai's deep love for Li Tianlan at all costs, and he admired the generosity of the master of Samsara Palace. If the master of Samsara Palace, who held the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, put on this clothes, her strength could even go to a higher level. Li Tianlan nodded, put away the Cloud Silk, and said slowly, "Give it to Rushi first. Repair it as soon as possible. I guess it will be used soon. After the final maneuver, I may go to Snow Country." Snow Country. Lin Yuxian nodded instinctively, but as soon as he said it, he suddenly froze. He finally realized what he had ignored. Tonight, all this was so exciting that he ignored the final maneuver. Wang Shengxiao, Gu Hanshan, and Jiang Shangyu teamed up to deal with Li Tianlan in the final maneuver. Li Tianlan had just cut off one of Gu Qianchuan's arms, and he forced Gu Xingyun, who had recovered some strength, to flee. When they came back, Lin Yuxian could clearly see the blood all over Li Tianlan's body. In his current state, could he still participate in the final maneuver? "How are your injuries?" Lin Yuxian hesitated. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and rolled up his cuffs. There was still some dark red blood on his arm, and there was a wound that had just been torn. But at this moment, his wound was no longer bleeding, and it began to heal gradually. Lin Yuxian opened his eyes wide. "My internal injury is not serious, and the external injury has begun to heal. It's not a big problem." Li Tianlan paused and continued, "I'll be fine after sleep." Lin Yuxian was silent for a long time. Then he took a deep breath and scolded with a smile. "F***CK, I have seen the videos of your previous 2 moves. I thought your physical strength was your biggest weakness. Now it seems ridiculous." "Weakness?" Li Tianlan was stunned and did not speak. His martial arts had reached the basic level, and his sword intent had already taken shape. But it was just the beginning. His strongest point right now was his body. Lin Yuxian slowly stood up from the sofa and went upstairs alone. "I should be able to break through these days. If you're not here, I will go to the East Emperor Palace to find you." Li Tianlan said, Lin Yuxian went upstairs, found a room at random, and went in. Li Tianlan's interpretation of martial arts and his own understanding of martial arts constantly collided with dazzling aura and sparks in his mind. Lin Yuxian sat on the bed, closed his eyes, concentrated, and calmed down. In the endless aura, he gradually entered the state of meditation. At the moment when his consciousness returned to concentration and purity, Lin Yuxian suddenly thought of his sword again. That sword was not the break of the sky. It was the 9th blade, Dusk. The sword that should have pierced Gu Xingyun's body eventually pierced the girl's chest. At that time, in the dim yellow sky, Lin Yuxian did not see the girl's appearance clearly. Now, in retrospect, he only felt that the girl's eyes were so bright and delicate. He did not know how the girl was now. The one upstairs was meditating, and the one downstairs was contemplating. The lights in the hall gradually went out. Li Tianlan stood in front of the window and quietly looked at Winter Mountain outside the Silver Lake Villa. It was late at night outside the window. Lights were everywhere on Winter Mountain. It had been nearly 3 hours since Gu Xingyun was attacked, but things did not subside. Instead, they became more and more intense. More and more people came to Winter Mountain. Li Tianlan watched silently, but he was calculating the gains and losses of tonight. He wanted to kill Gu Xingyun, but Gu Xingyun escaped. It was unexpected but reasonable. As an invincible realm expert who ranked 5th on the divine list, no matter how poor he was, he would have the ability to save his life at the critical moment. Li Tianlan felt a little regretful, but he was not upset. Gu Qianchuan lost an arm, which seemed to be a gain. But Li Tianlan was very clear that if he was decisive enough at that time and did not chase Gu Xingyun, Gu Qianchuan, an expert on the holy list with a broken arm, would probably die tonight. However, if he killed Gu Qianchuan and missed the time to chase, Lin Yuxian would also die. Tonight's battle seemed to be reckless, but the consequences should not be too serious. The army came to Winter Mountain, which proved that the attack on Gu Xingyun was no longer a secret. But the most important thing was whether Gu Xingyun would say that the person who attacked him was him. Once Gu Xingyun said that he attacked him, all the majesty of Kunlun City would collapse in an instant. More than 20 years ago, they worked hard to overthrow the Leaf family with everything they had. More than 20 years later, a descendant of the Leaf family, who had not yet grown up, broke the arm of the second in Kunlun City and made the god of war of Zhongzhou State flee. This matter was a joke, no matter how he looked at it. Of course, Li Tianlan was also very sober. If Gu Xingyun had absolute certainty to nail him, even if the majesty of Kunlun City was gone, he would still identify him. Attacking the god of war of Zhongzhou State. Such a crime could be regarded as treason. If Gu Xingyun had conclusive evidence, he could absolutely use the whole Zhongzhou State to completely crush him and the Li family. But the problem was that he could not produce enough evidence. He wore a mask tonight. Such a ridiculous cover could play a big role at a critical moment. He did not use the 24 moves of sword of the Li family. All the sword intent returned to nothingness. Except for Lin Yuxian, no one around him knew his plan tonight. As long as he left Winter Mountain, Kunlun City could not produce any evidence. Perhaps Kunlun City would use its own power to nail him to death, but now the Li family was no longer fighting alone. The giant group would not sit idly by, and the academics would no longer have an ambiguous attitude on this kind of thing. Instead, they would clearly support him. In this way, this matter might not be too small, but in the final analysis, it was just a quarrel at the meeting of the decision-making committee. Kunlun City was even very likely not to tell him, but to secretly retaliate. But Gu Qianchuan was not to be feared. Gu Xingyun, Li Tianlan smiled. He did miss the opportunity to kill Gu Qianchuan tonight, but he also got a lot. At least, the result tonight was in line with his expectations. It was a pity that Gu Xingyun did not die, but it was not unacceptable. At the symposium, he had roughly confirmed the degree of Gu Xingyun's serious injury, so he took action tonight. After tonight, Gu Xingyun forced his seriously injured body to burst out his strength, and his injury would be more serious. Even if Gu Xingyun could not die, he could not recover in a short time. It could be foreseen that at least in the next 3 to 5 years, the threat from the absolute strength of Kunlun City that he had to face would become minimal. The pressure that the Li family and he had to face was directly reduced by half. The Wang family of Beihai was still so powerful that it made people desperate. But optimistically, the current situation was much better than the alliance between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Without the threat of Kunlun City, the Li family could also put more energy on the Wang family of Beihai. Compared with losing the opportunity to kill Gu Qianchuan, it was more worthwhile to prolong Gu Xingyun's recovery period. Li Tianlan clenched his fists and whispered to himself, "It's worth it." Between gains and losses, whether it was worth it or not, once there was a clear result, there would be no choice. The sky gradually brightened. The morning sun leaped out of the sea, and the sky was clear. The sun shone on Mount Dibbing with birds chirping and flowers. The verdant and bright Mount Dibbing was quiet and peaceful, just like a paradise. Wang Yuedong quietly cleaned her room. Her movements were careful and serious, and she did not miss any corner. This was a room full of the soft atmosphere of a young girl. It was large but not empty. The pale pink walls were warm and soft. The hazy gauze curtain fluttered with the fresh sea breeze blowing through the window. The wind chimes hanging in the room made a pleasant sound. The room was full of large and small plush toys. Some of them were a little old, but they were very clean. Wang Yuetong finished cleaning the room and put all the plush toys one by one. Looking at the spotless bedroom, her eyes were very sad, but there was a hint of a smile in them. A small suitcase was placed at her feet. There were only a few sets of clothes in the suitcase. In fact, there was nothing to pack. She came back this time just to have a look. This room, this palace, this mountain, and even the whole province. When she came back again, she did not know when it would be. "Tong, have you really made up your mind?" A soft and gentle voice sounded behind Wang Yuetong. Summer Solstice walked into the room and reached out to gently stroke Wang Yuetong's short hair. Her eyes were doting and complicated. Yes, Wang Yuetong nodded hard. Young people are so naive. Summer Solstice sighed softly and said, "I believe Li Tianlong likes you. But can you be sure whether he loves you or not? The positions between you are destined to bear unimaginable pressure and even torture when you are together in the future. Can you imagine that kind of pain?" "I know," Wang Yuetong whispered. "I have thought about these problems very seriously, but I really can't let him go. It may not be easy in the future, but if I give up on him, maybe my life will be more difficult. Mom, I have decided." Her voice lowered. "I really have decided." Summer Solstice sighed softly, took out a card, and gave it to Wang Yuetong. Wang Yuetong shook her head subconsciously. This time when she returned to the Wang family of Beihai, although it was not to break off the relationship with the family, it basically meant leaving the family with nothing. This card was the wealth of the Wang family of Beihai. How could she take it? "Take it as the dowry I prepared for you," Summer Solstice said with a smile. She had said too much to persuade her, but her daughter had made it clear that she wanted to go all the way. No matter how much she said, it would not work. "Take it." Summer Solstice put the card in her daughter's hand, blinked, and whispered, "This is my private money. In the future, treat yourself better when you are outside. Silly girl, no matter what happens, don't wrong yourself, especially when you get along with Li Tianlong. Don't give in unconditionally. The feelings between a man and a woman are simple and complicated. It's okay once or twice, but how can there be happiness if you feel wronged too much? If you're not happy, the couple will become a couple with resentment. I don't know what will happen to you in the future, but anyway, you have to remember that this is what you are willing to give up everything for. For a woman, such an opportunity only comes once in her life, and it is a big gamble. If you win, you'll be happy. If you lose, your heart will die. Tong, no matter what will happen to you in the future, even if you can't be together and become enemies, I don't want you to hate him. I'm not optimistic about him, but I feel sorry for you. Hating a person is often harder than loving a person." Wang Yuetong blinked desperately, nodded silently, and whispered, "Mom, I won't hate him, and I won't regret it." Summer Solstice smiled again and whispered, "Well, if you're unhappy in the future, you can come back. You are our daughter. We are a family, and we don't need to apologize. If he is not good to you, tell me, and I will find someone to deal with him." Wang Yuetong took a deep breath and did not speak. She bent down to pick up the suitcase on the ground and quickly walked out of the room. Summer Solstice looked at her daughter's back and sighed softly. There seemed to be a faint exclamation downstairs. Summer Solstice walked out of the room. In her sight, her daughter had reached the hall downstairs. At this time, her husband was standing quietly in front of her. Summer Solstice wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. Finally, she kept silent. Wang Yuetong looked at her father in front of her in a panic. Wang Tianzong's face was calm, without the slightest emotion. His eyes swept over the suitcase in Wang Yuetong's hand. Wang Yuetong's body trembled slightly, and she subconsciously wanted to let go of her hand. But then she realized what it meant. Her face turned pale, and she held the suitcase tightly. "Dad," Wang Yuedong called softly. She glanced at her father and whispered, "I'm leaving." "Where are you going?" Wang Tianzong asked. "To Huading." Wang Yuetong bit her lip, thinking of her destination and her man. She seemed to have more courage. "I'm going to find Tianlan." A few hours ago, Li Tianlan attacked Gu Xingyun in Huading. Gu Qinchuan's arm was destroyed by him, and Gu Xingyun was injured again. I have to admit that I was wrong at that time. Even in my eyes, Li Tianlan is now a big shot. You have a good taste in men. Wang Tianzong showed a smile at the corner of his mouth. Not only Wang Yuetong, but also Summer Solstice, who heard the news, was shocked and had an incredible expression on her face. Wang Yuetong was not surprised, but panicked. She didn't think about Gu Xingyun and Gu Qinchuan at all. She just asked subconsciously, "How is Tianlan?" "I don't know." Wang Tianzong shook his head. Wang Yuetong said nothing and was about to go out. Wang Tianzong reached out and stopped his daughter. "Stay here for a few days," Wang Tianzong said calmly. Wang Yuetong's body stiffened. She looked at Wang Tianzong's expression, and her face gradually turned pale. "I don't object to you going to Huading," Wang Tianzong said lightly, "but that's after the final maneuver. At that time, if Li Tianlan can survive, I will respect your choice." Wang Yuetong's eyes gradually dimmed. Her father said that if Li Tianlan could survive, but in his tone, Wang Yuetong only heard the killing intent. "Tianlan can destroy Gu Qinchuan's arm. My brother is no match for Tianlan." Wang Yuetong bit her lip and said, "He may win," Wang Tianzong said calmly, "but he must not survive. If he wins the final maneuver, I will personally send him to hell." He said the last sentence resolutely and decisively, leaving no room for negotiation. Wang Yuetong's face was so pale that it seemed transparent. "You stay at home," Wang Tianzong said. "Everything will wait until the end of the maneuver." He turned around and walked to the gate. Wang Yuetong stared at his back in a daze. Wang Tianzong's figure walked out of the gate and disappeared into the bright sunshine outside. His figure seemed to be shining with a layer of golden light. The gate of the palace was slowly closed. Wang Yuetong suddenly screamed and seemed to use all her strength. "If you kill my man, I will hate you for the rest of my life. I hate you. I hate you." Wang Tianzong's footsteps suddenly froze for a moment. His face seemed to flash with a touch of blue. Wang Yuetong's scream was still echoing. Wang Tianzong did not look back and slowly walked down the steps in front of the palace. A man in black stood at the foot of the steps. Seeing Wang Tianzong come out, he bent down and said respectfully, "Your Majesty." "Say it." Wang Tianzong's voice was very cold. "We have confirmed the headquarters of the Samsara Palace." The black-clothed man's body trembled as he quickly spoke. His code name was Xianming, and he was responsible for managing all the intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai. "Are you sure?" Wang Tianzong asked. "Yes, I'm sure," Xianming said in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth, took a deep breath, and said, "Let's go now." He left the palace behind him with steady steps. In the palace, Wang Yuetong's hoarse and desperate cries were faintly heard. Wang Tianzong's eyes were complicated, but his footsteps did not stop. Wang Yuetong had a good eye. Li Tianlan was really strong, but Li Tianlan was an enemy. The stronger he was, the faster he would die. Wang Tianzong had made up his mind that if Li Tianlan really won the final maneuver, he would directly kill Li Tianlan on the spot. Even if Lin Fengding fell out with him and fought with him, he would not give in at all. In today's era, if he wanted to kill a person, no one in the whole dark world could stop him. Not Lin Fengding, not even deity. He had made up his mind at all costs. So he would not pay attention to Li Tianlan. In the final maneuver a few days later, no matter how dazzling he was, he would just kill him with a sword. As long as he killed Li Tianlan, there would be no shadow in the future of the Wang family of Beihai. If he killed him, Wang Tianzong would only get infinite opportunities and light in the future. What he would lose would be the father-daughter relationship for more than 20 years. Chapter 364. A big chapter of 8,000 words, you know. The cold wind never stopped blowing through the mountains. The vast snow was dancing in the air almost forever. It was lonely, monotonous, and cold. Whether it was wind, frost, rain, or snow, whether it was midsummer or winter, the wind and snow here seemed to be always unchanged, with a desolation that seemed to howl to the end of the world. There was a mountain in the snow. There was a city at the foot of the mountain. The exquisite and quaint black city was silent under the snow, black and white, looking extremely mysterious and majestic. Strong wind, heavy snow, high mountains, and black city. Under the sky that seemed to be always gloomy in the northwest. This was an extremely shocking picture. Gu Xingyun stood on the top of the mountain, facing the wind and snow. Kunlun was very big, but this mountain was the highest mountain in a radius of 100 miles. Standing here, the city was at his feet, the mountain was at his feet, and the whole world seemed to be crawling under his feet. Such a high position, Huading, Yuzhou, and all corners of the world were close at hand. Gu Xingyun could feel his absolute strength and see the absolute glory of Kunlun City. Zhongzhou State had already stood at the commanding heights of the world, and Kunlun City was at the highest point of Zhongzhou State. He stood at the peak of Kunlun City, looking down at the world. He had great achievements and unparalleled martial arts. Gu Xingyun laughed. His laughter easily passed through the heaven and earth and echoed among the mountains and snow. Blood flowed behind him. Dozens of corpses fell behind him, and blood stained a large area of snow. Gu Xingyun turned to look at the corpses. There were not many corpses, but they all had different appearances and figures. Every one of them represented the peak power in the world. Every weapon was a famous magic weapon in the dark world. But now the weapons were broken, and the so-called invincibility all became corpses. Gu Xingyun looked at his arm. There was a black arm guard wrapped around his arm, ferocious and gloomy. This was the human emperor, known as the first murderous weapon in the dark world. Gu Xingyun continued to laugh wildly, arrogantly, and presumptuously. At his feet, the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai, listen to the sea, had been broken into two pieces. The body of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State was almost completely submerged in the wind and snow. After Wang Tianzong, it was Li Honghe, Li Kuangtu, Didi, Lin Fengting, the master of Samsara Palace, tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance, Saint War Angel Arceus of the Vatican, Casrotter, the god of war of Star State. Each and every famous name had now become a dead man. Gu Xingyun sneered and admired his work. He looked at the corpses one by one, and his expression became more and more satisfied. From beginning to end, when he saw the last corpse, Gu Xingyun frowned. He felt like he had overlooked something. It seemed like there was someone missing from these corpses. Who was missing? Who was still alive? He counted again. Wang Tianzong, Li Honghe, Li Kuangtu, Summer Solstice, Situ, Sang Yue, and even Li Shi's body were here. He couldn't remember who was missing. Gu Xingyun snorted coldly and said in a cold tone, "They should all be killed." He looked at the horizon. A ball of orange light lit up at the end of the gloomy and snowy world. The moment he entered his line of sight, the orange light suddenly spread out and turned into an endless, raging fire. The fire burned the whole sky. The biting cold wind and flying snow all stopped. The burning sky slowly pressed down. The mountains were collapsing, and Haicheng was on the verge of collapse. Gu Xingyun's body seemed to have lost all its strength in an instant. He could only watch the fire full of destruction falling down and wrapping him up completely. Haicheng suddenly collapsed completely. In the loud roar, the world was dark. Gu Xingyun suddenly opened his eyes and sat up from the bed. It was sunny outside the window. The bright light shone through the window, and the room was clean and refreshing. Gu Xingyun's eyes were white, and his mouth and nose were full of the pungent smell of hospital disinfectant. He gasped for breath, and it took him a long time to realize that he had just experienced a dream. In the dream, he was powerful enough to overturn the whole world. The 6 groups in Zhongzhou State suffered heavy losses under his operation. The Li family and the Wang family of Beihai at their peak were destroyed by him, and all the superpowers in the world surrendered at his feet. At that time, he was very young, high-spirited, and arrogant. That was the most wonderful dream. But now looking back, in the constantly disappearing dream, Gu Xingyun could only feel fear. It was like the fear after experiencing the most terrible nightmare. His heart beat wildly, his head was covered with cold sweat, and his mouth was dry. He took a deep breath and suddenly got up to find water. But as soon as he moved, the tearing pain all over his body suddenly made him fall off the bed. His body trembled violently, and his mind was blank, but his heart was completely sober. He forgot the nightmare and remembered the night when he was attacked. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth, endured the severe pain in his body, and moved back to the bed little by little. Like a wounded beast, he gasped deeply. Everything in his sight became completely clear. The room he was in was a ward. It seemed to be a single room, but at this time, there were 3 beds side by side. His bed was in the middle, and on the left was Li Qingcheng in a hospital gown. The young girl, who had just turned 20 this year, was pale, and her long eyelashes blinked uneasily. The sun fell on her with a kind of beautiful charm. She seemed to be in pain, but her breathing became steady. Gu Xingyun breathed a sigh of relief and looked at his unconscious daughter with complicated eyes. He turned his head and looked at the right side. Gu Qianchuan on the right side was also unconscious. Gu Xingyun glanced at him casually, and his movements suddenly froze. He stared at Gu Qianchuan lying on the bed. Gu Qianchuan was motionless, but there was nothing in the cuff of his clothes. Gu Xingyun had an incredible expression, as if he had seen a ghost in the daytime. There were hurried footsteps outside the door. The ward was pushed open, and a middle-aged man walked quickly into the ward with a solemn face. The man was handsome, but there was a very eye-catching scar on his face. He was slightly short and wore a lieutenant general's military uniform, looking extremely fierce and domineering. "Your Highness, are you okay?" The lieutenant general reached out and shook hands with Gu Xingyun, looking sincere and serious. But Gu Xingyun clearly saw a touch of gloating mockery in the other party's eyes. "I'm okay." Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Yi Fengsheng, the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau. He was one of the backbone generals of the Wang family of Beihai. Among the experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm in Zhongzhou State, his strength might not be the top, but he was a famous madman. Gu Xingyun was attacked in Huading, so Yi Fengsheng naturally had to visit him because of his position. "It's good that you're okay." Yi Fengsheng smiled, pulled a chair at random, and sat down opposite Gu Xingyun. "Minister Zhang Qi is still investigating in Mount Dong. I have to say that the person who attacked you and Marshal Gu Qianchuan last night was really bold, but we haven't got too many clues yet. I wonder if you can provide us with some useful information. Oh, by the way, how many of your guards survived? I heard from them that you mentioned Li Tianlan's name." Gu Qianchuan's face changed, and he took a deep look at Yi Fengsheng. Yi Fengsheng still smiled, but the mockery in his eyes was undisguised. He said meaningfully, "Is it true that the god of war in Zhongzhou State was seriously injured by a young man?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Gu Xingyun narrowed his eyes. He thought of everything last night, took a deep breath, and made up his mind in a short time. "I haven't seen Li Tianlan. I don't know the person who attacked me last night. This needs your Huading Special Operations Bureau to investigate. If you're short of manpower, you can report to the Special Warfare Headquarters, and Kunlun City can directly intervene." Gu Xingyun's voice was a little distorted and depressed. God knew how aggrieved he was when he said this, but he really didn't have enough evidence to pin Li Tianlan. If he continued to make trouble, the whole Kunlun City would become a joke for Li Tianlan's prestige. He could only hold back his anger. "We'll try our best." Yi Fengsheng smiled, stood up, and said, "That's it. Your Highness, have a good rest. I've informed Secretary Zhong, and he will come to visit later." He turned and left the ward, his back unrestrained. Gu Xingyun looked at Yi Fengsheng's back with a gloomy face, and the corners of his mouth twitched. After a long time, he muttered to himself. This matter will not end like this. He couldn't find evidence to pin Li Tianlan. But Kunlun City now had far more strength than the Li family, and it had the same position as the Wang family of Beihai. If he couldn't find evidence, then he wouldn't look for it. He must die. He must die. This bastard, cut him into pieces and feed him to the dogs. A hoarse, painful voice with great resentment suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyun's ear. Gu Xingyun turned his head. On the bed on his right, Gu Qianchuan had woken up. He tightly covered his shoulder with one arm missing. His eyes were chaotic, and his whole face was distorted. He was ferocious and almost crazy. Gu Xingyun's heart was filled with anger. He was attacked and fled, but as long as he could hold on, the problem would not be very big. Gu Qianchuan's lost arm was the root of Kunlun City's disgrace. The arm of an invincible realm expert on the holy list was cut off by a young man. In addition to showing that Li Tianlan was amazing enough, it could only show the incompetence of Kunlun City. How did you end up like this? Gu Xingyun frowned and asked. Gu Qianchuan froze for a moment. He could hear the dissatisfaction in Gu Xingyun's tone. His face turned red in an instant, but he didn't know what to say. Was he careless? Or was he too concerned about Gu Xingyun's comfort? This explanation was objectively acceptable, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, it undoubtedly showed that he was useless. Gu Qianchuan lowered his head and clenched his fists. If you're okay, take Qingsheng and leave Huading first, Gu Xingyun said calmly. Gu Qianchuan raised his head subconsciously. What about you? Me? Gu Xingyun laughed at himself. I'm afraid that before dark, the news that I was seriously injured by Li Tianlan will spread throughout Zhongzhou State. If I don't show up, there are even many people who say that I'm dead. How can I go? Where can I go? I must stay to participate in the final maneuver. Before that, I can't go anywhere. If it was in normal times, Gu Xingyun naturally didn't care about these rumors. But now he was really seriously injured, and he was destined not to show up for a long time. In this way, these rumors were deadly enough. So it was impossible for him to leave Huading now. Even if he had to hold on, he had to hold on to the final maneuver. What about Li Tianlan? Are we just going to let it go? Gu Qianchuan's tone was gloomy. Let go. Gu Xingyun sneered. He will die, and he will die in the maneuver. He didn't tell Yi Fengsheng that it was Li Tianlan who attacked him, and he was not going to tell anyone. But it didn't mean that he would let it go. Let go? How could it be possible? Gu Xingyun lowered his head, took out his mobile phone from the bag containing his dirty clothes, and dialed a number. Kunlun, in the majestic black city, standing in the wind and snow, a white and delicate palm pressed the answer button, but she did not take the initiative to speak. The two ends of the phone were separated by the city, the wind and snow, the mountains and rivers, and the sea. There was only silence and numbness. Gu Xingyun seemed to have adapted to the other party's attitude, so on the phone, his tone did not fluctuate at all. Come to Huading. His tone was close to a command. What's the matter? Li Shi held the mobile phone in her hand tightly and asked numbly. Kill a man for me. Gu Xingyun's tone was cold. Didn't you say that you had nothing to do with the Li family? Very well, in the final maneuver, I will give you a chance to prove yourself. I want you to kill Li Tianlan in person at the scene of the maneuver. I don't want to hear nonsense. Come here right now. In the case that he was seriously injured, it was difficult for Gu Qianchuan to check and balance Li Tianlan. Kunlun City did not have so many deep foundations and secret troops with amazing destructive power. Even if there were, Gu Xingyun did not want to waste them on Li Tianlan. It was the safest choice to let Li Shi do it. When everyone marveled that there were 3 invincible realm experts in the high-end combat capability of the Jiang family of South America, only a few people knew that there were also 3 invincible realm experts in Kunlun City. There were only 2 invincible realm experts left in the Jiang family of South America, and there were still 3 in Kunlun City. What few people knew was that, as the governor of Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun was not the strongest expert in Kunlun City. In terms of strength, Li Shi, who came from Kunlun City and was favored by Li Guangtu in those days, was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. She had the 10th unique domain and the 24 moves of sword in her body. The numb and silent madam of the governor was the strongest expert in Kunlun City. Li Shi was silent and did not speak for a long time. What? Bitch, you don't want to do it. Gu Xingyun's tone gradually became irritable. Li Shi's hand holding the phone was still trembling, and her face was so pale that it seemed transparent. I have done it. She tried hard to control her emotions. 3 years ago, in Heaven Capital, I killed him once, but he is not dead. Gu Xingyun said in a cold tone. Then you kill him again and finish what you failed to do 3 years ago. Otherwise, I can't guarantee Qingqing's fate. Li Shi's face became paler. Qingqing again. Her trip to Heaven Capital 3 years ago was related to her daughter, Li Qingqing. At that time, if she did not go to Heaven Capital, Gu Xingyun would put Li Qingqing in Heaven Capital and even arrange her to be with Li Tianlan quietly. That result was equivalent to fundamentally determining Li Qingqing's fate in the future. Her daughter would repeat her path, and the old things would be reincarnated again. So she stopped Gu Xingyun and went to Heaven Capital in person. And recently, Gu Xingyun asked her to go to Huading, which was exactly the same threat as that year. It was very despicable, but it was absolutely effective. After the matter in Huading is over, you will go to Snow Country on behalf of Kunlun City. I will return your daughter to you afterward. Gu Xingyun said and hung up the phone directly. Li Shi seemed to be drained of all her strength in an instant. She put down the phone numbly. After a long silence, she slowly turned around and walked out of the door. The wind and snow outside the door were still howling. The whole black city looked more and more gloomy. A maid came over and said respectfully and cleverly, Madam, prepare the helicopter. Li Shi said numbly, I'm going to Huading. In the era of explosive communication, any so-called intelligence was just a matter of a phone call or an email. If they were more cautious, it was just a matter of an encrypted phone call or an encrypted email. The attack on Gu Xingyun was a major event in Zhongzhou State. Major events were often not kept secret. So when the garrison of Huading, the police, and the Special Operations Bureau rushed to Winter Mountain together, Wang Shengxiao had already received a call from Yi Fengsheng, the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Huading. When he received the call, Wang Shengxiao was still chatting with Song Si in bed. But after listening to the content of the phone, Wang Shengxiao, who had been calm since he broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, changed his face completely. He kept the weird posture of answering the phone. Until a long time after Yi Fengsheng hung up the phone, his movements did not change at all. There was no anger, no jealousy, no unwillingness. He sat quietly, and his eyes were full of surprise, doubt, and bitterness. What's wrong? Song Si clearly noticed Wang Shengxiao's unusual behavior. She put on her pajamas and sat beside him. Wang Shengxiao was motionless and unresponsive. When Song Si asked for the third time, he took a deep breath and glanced at Song Si. You said, Wang Shengxiao's voice was a little erratic, but his eyes gradually became calm. If I fight with all my strength now, how strong can I be? Song Si was thoughtful. Wang Shengxiao was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but he had a top inheritance and was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm with wind and thunder veins. Such a person was strong enough to crush and even defeat all opponents in the same realm in any realm. How strong was Wang Shengxiao? Song Si thought for a moment and said softly, If you fight with all your strength, you should be able to fight against the top half-step invincible realm now. Ordinary half-step invincible realm experts will not be your match. Really strong. Wang Shengxiao laughed, but it was a little self-deprecating. How am I now compared to Brother Jiang? Brother Jiang? Song Si was a little confused. She thought for a moment and said uncertainly, My Lord Di Jiang? Wang Shengxiao nodded. My Lord Di Jiang is His Majesty's disciple. Now he has the combat capability of the invincible realm. He is about to become the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou State. Compared with him, you are still a little worse. Song Si said cautiously. Yes, I am indeed a little worse. Wang Shengxiao whispered to himself, but compared with Gu Qianquan, Brother Jiang is also a little worse. Song Si was silent. Although Di Jiang with double thunder veins had not entered the invincible realm for the time being, compared with Gu Qianquan, who had just broken through the invincible realm, he should be on par or slightly stronger. But Gu Qianquan had been in the invincible realm for 8 years. He had stabilized his realm, further understood the 10 skills of true martial arts, and successfully entered the holy list. Di Jiang was not in the invincible realm, so he was indeed a little inferior to Gu Qianquan. But just a few hours ago, Li Tianlan attacked the Purple Gold Pavilion. He not only broke Gu Qianquan's arm, but also forced Gu Xingyun to flee. Wang Shengxiao finally smiled bitterly, and his eyes became more and more confused. How'd he do all this? Song Si's face changed dramatically. It was not a big deal to force Gu Xingyun to flee. Gu Xingyun had been seriously injured, but it was really incredible that he broke Gu Qianquan's arm. Had Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm? How could a 22-year-old invincible realm expert bear such a huge force? It's fake. Song Si did not even think much and said instinctively. Wang Shengxiao glanced at her but did not speak. He could imagine how much influence the news would have after it spread throughout Zhongzhou state. A great uproar was not enough to describe it. If there was a word to describe it, it would be stormy waves. Li Tianlan still had potential, but after what happened tonight, he not only had potential, but his combat capability would also be recognized. He broke Gu Qianquan's arm. Even if he was not in the invincible realm, he at least had the combat capability of the invincible realm. From now on, calling Li Tianlan Your Highness was really worthy of his name. And from today on, Li Tianlan had the value that all the young people, including Wang Shengxiao and Gu Hanshan, did not have. How did the gap come about? How could it get farther and farther away? Wang Shengxiao did not know, but he knew very well that if he did not fight hard, he might not even be able to see Li Tianlan's back. If it's true, Song Si's face was a little pale and even a little panicked. Then in the final maneuver, Wang Shengxiao whispered, "He is really strong, but not strong enough to make me retreat without a fight. But if you insist, who can guarantee that Gu Hanshan and Jiang Shanyu will also insist?" Song Si's tone was hurried. "They are them, and I am me. Even if they all abstain, I will appear on the battlefield. If I don't even have the courage to fight, I don't know what the Wang family of Beihai will become under my leadership in the future." Wang Shengxiao glanced at Song Si calmly. It was already the early morning of the 24th. There was less than a week before the final maneuver. "I want to meditate." Wang Shengxiao said, "It's time to get ready. No matter the outcome, at least I still have half a sword to choose." Song Si's face kept changing. Wang Shengxiao did have half a sword to choose. 3 years ago in Heaven Capital, he had used the sword intent of firmament to use the half 6 paths. 3 years later, he had stood at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and could barely use the half reincarnation, although it was the half reincarnation. But as long as he drew his sword, Wang Shengxiao believed that even in the face of the invincible realm, he could be invincible. Dongqing Wudi flew back to Zhongyuan from Yuzhou overnight. But when the sun rose, Dongcheng Hanguang, whose biological clock had always been very regular, went downstairs and saw his son in a marshal's uniform sitting in the dining room, eating breakfast at first glance. Dongqing Wudi was dealing with the soup dumplings in front of him. He ate very slowly, chewing and swallowing slowly, but his movements were extremely firm. In front of Dongqing Hanguang, he was a filial son. In front of Bai Qingqian, he was an incompetent husband. But in front of the soldiers of Zhongzhou State, he was always the invincible god of massacre of Zhongzhou State. This was a man who could give people a feeling of indomitable, even when eating. Dongqing Hanguang, who had not slept in the second half of the night, gave up the plan to go out for a walk and walked into the dining room. He waved his hand, motioned his son, who had stood up to sit down, and asked casually, "When did you come back?" "Less than 2 hours." Dongqing Wudi swallowed the steamed bun and said calmly, "Did you hear the news last night?" Dongqing Hanguang picked up a steamed bun and whispered, "Yes." Dongqing Wudi laughed, with a kind of brilliance different from iron-blooded killing on his face. "Good boy, he cut off one of Gu Qianquan's arms." Standing in front of him, I'm no longer his opponent. Amazing. If he grows up smoothly, he may really enter the invincible realm before the age of 30. Dongqing Hongguang also smiled, but there was some worry in his eyes. I said the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. If his injury last night was not serious, he should win in the final maneuver. But the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City is not to be feared. Dongqing Wudi said, Gu Xingyun is seriously injured, and Gu Qianchuan's arm is broken. There is no threat for the time being. Stupid. Dongqing Hongguang's eyes darkened, and he said coldly, Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianchuan are not a threat, but how can you be sure that woman will not take action? That woman, Dongqing Wudi's face changed, and he was silent. In a sense, the woman's breakthrough into the invincible realm was the most important opportunity for Kunlun City to make up its mind to overthrow Li Kuang-tu. If she joins forces with the Wang family of Beihai, she and Wang Tianzong, how can Tianlan survive? Dongqing Hongguang said slowly. Dongqing Wudi picked up a steam bun and put it in his mouth. He slowly bit the steam bun and said slowly, It's okay. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him. Tianlan is still young, and there are some things that he should not bear. The younger generation's affairs should be solved by the younger generation. If they want to bully the weak, they have to ask for my permission. He sneered slightly. Wang Tianzong? And that woman? She is really strong. But what can she do no matter how strong she is? Have you made up your mind? Dongqing Hongguang's tone was light. It's not determination. Dongqing Wudi smiled. Dad, this is the most correct decision. We may give up something for the time being, but only temporarily. If I don't make this decision this time, when the truth comes out, the people of the Dongshang clan will be disunited. Dongqing Hongguang was silent. Hidden Dragon Sea. After a long silence, he suddenly said, I've met with the president. Dongqing Wudi said calmly, The president will go abroad for a visit in a few days. Dongqing Hongguang's face relaxed, and he said with a smile, What are you going to do? It's just a head-on confrontation. Dongqing Wudi said, I'm ready. In addition, I've contacted Qin Weibai, and she will secretly cooperate with me on some things. Qin Weibai, Dongqing Hongguang's eyes flashed with inexplicable brilliance. She is indeed a strange woman. She is now in Snow Country, and I don't know what she is planning. Snow Country, troubled times, great changes are coming. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. The real storm is coming. Hey, Dongqing Hongguang smiled, and his tone was complicated. Snow Country, Mormons. Qin Weibai was looking at a document sent from Zhongzhou State. In the spacious study, a figure shrouded in a black cloak was holding a copy and looking at it seriously. There was not much content in the document. So in just a few minutes, Qin Weibai had put the document on the desk. Is my man powerful? Qin Weibai patted the document gently. She seemed to be in a good mood, and her laughter was a little loud. Tianlan is in danger. The voice of the man wrapped in a cloak was elegant. His figure looked like a military counselor or a saint, but there were some differences. He put down the copy in his hand, hesitated, and reached out to tear off the cloak on his body. He said helplessly, I'm really not used to this. How did the two military counselors and saint get used to this thing? After the cloak was taken off, a handsome and elegant face appeared in the study. A face that should have been in linen at this time. The patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. They're not used to it either. Qin Weibai said with a smile, but they have to hide their identities, so they have to get used to it. As the patriarch of the Lin clan, if you don't enter the secular world, you have to suffer for a while. Lin Fengting shook his head helplessly and pointed to the document on the table. Once the news gets out, Tianlan will be in danger. Tianzong and Kunlun City will definitely not let him go. Maybe they will take action at the scene of the final maneuver. He paused and said, Am I too early? It's okay. Qin Weibai shook her head with certainty. Her voice was very soft, and her tone was very confident. Dongqing Wudi is trustworthy. As long as he is here, Tianlan will be fine. You can only protect him for a while in Zhongzhou State. It doesn't make much sense. As long as the deterrent of the Dongsheng clan is still there, no one will dare to act rashly. Between the top force and the super wealthy family, in terms of power, the super wealthy family is better. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes and said softly, "Then what am I doing here now? It doesn't seem to make sense here. It's easier to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance from here. The Polar Ground Alliance is in civil strife, and the tyrant has become a coward. It's really not easy to find him. But I already have a clue, and there will be results in a few days. The final battle will be held in Snow Country, and the Polar Ground Alliance is the best signal." Qin Weibai said calmly. "You mean the final battle will be held in the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance?" Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. "No." Qin Weibai shook her head and pointed to her feet. "The final battle will be held here. Snow Country, Mormon City. This was the final battle site that the Samsara Palace, which provoked the chaos in the Dark World, had set up 3 years ago." Lin Fengting just wanted to ask something, and a phone suddenly rang. Qin Weibai looked at the number and answered the phone. "Boss." On the phone, a calm voice sounded. "The fish has taken the bait." Qin Weibai didn't say much and hung up the phone directly. Lin Fengting also heard the phone and asked subconsciously, "The fish has taken the bait. What do you mean?" "I sent someone to attack summer solstice. But I also said that I would give Wang Tianzong a chance to go crazy." Qin Weibai said softly, "So when I sent someone to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance, I deliberately used some bait to leak the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong has taken a bait." The headquarters of the Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. "What's there? A tight dragnet? A trap?" "There's nothing." Qin Weibai shook her head. "There's only one opportunity for the final battle." Lin Fengting was silent for a while, and then said in a complicated tone, "If so, it's not necessarily the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, is it?" "It can be regarded as the headquarters." Qin Weibai said, "It's indeed the place where the core members of the Samsara Palace have been stationed for many years. It can be regarded as the headquarters." She hesitated, glanced at Lin Fengting, and continued, "The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Zhongzhou State. It has always been in Zhongzhou State. I put it in the most conspicuous position, but no one can see it." Chapter 365. Deity looked at the sky in Wangtian Pavilion. In the evening, the sky of Heaven Capital was gloomy. The wind was blowing and it was raining. Benny, the biggest typhoon of the year, was about to land on East Island from Heaven Capital. The roaring hurricane shook the whole city. Looking from above, the whole Heaven Capital was in a frenzy in the hurricane. Deity stood on the rooftop of Wangtian Pavilion, dressed in black. The gale close to level 10 was blowing, and the rain kept falling, but it didn't shake his clothes at all. He just stood there in a trance. The roaring wind, the pouring rain, and the gloomy sky were all fake, and he was the most real. Deity looked up at the sky. The rain was falling fast, and the sky was gloomy. The night was coming, and there was a touch of darkness in the sky. Deity, dressed in black, seemed to be integrated with the night, and the whole night seemed to become vivid. There was no light in Wangtian Pavilion. The headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital was the tallest building in the entire Heaven Capital. It was pitch black and looked extremely dignified and majestic. On a stormy night, the lightless Skyview Pavilion was like a black monster standing in the Heaven Capital. Occasionally, lightning flashed across the sky. Under the pale electric light, the black Skyview Pavilion looked somewhat ferocious. A white figure appeared in the pitch-black but vivid night. The white shadow walked up to the rooftop in a hurry. The moment he saw Deity, he subconsciously slowed down. He held a letter tightly in his hand. Perhaps it was due to his excitement, but his eyes were extremely bright. His handsome and somewhat devilishly handsome face also became a little devilish because of this. Daybreak, the Senluo Temple Master of Heaven Capital. He was also the person closest to Deity in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. This closeness was based on strength and relationship. The murderous weapon of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Shadow the Ripper, had always been in the hands of Daybreak. This alone was enough to show Deity's absolute trust in Daybreak. "Your Highness." Daybreak walked behind Deity and said respectfully, "What are you so happy about?" Deity said with a chuckle. He was still looking at the night sky, and there was no smile in his eyes, only coldness. "A letter from Zhongzhou State." Daybreak gave the letter in his hand to Deity. Deity took it, but didn't open it. He already knew what was going to be said in the letter. A lot of news could be passed to him by a phone call. But Zhongzhou State sent a letter at this time. He didn't need to read it to know that the contents of the letter were not what he wanted to see. Deity silently looked at the envelope in his hand. After a long time, he meticulously tore the envelope open and took out the folded letter inside. There were a few lines of familiar handwriting on the paper, but because it had been too long, they had become somewhat unfamiliar. The handwriting was firm and elegant, but the strokes of the pen moved freely, revealing a kind of unrestrained strength that flowed like clouds and water. "The purgatory of Heaven Capital cannot replace Tiannan. You can't replace this world either. Tianlan is already invincible. Why don't we lower our heads? Why don't you let go?" The letter had no opening or ending. There were only a few sentences. Deity squinted at the last 8 words. He might as well lower his head. It was better to let go. His heart was a little cold, but he wasn't angry. He just focused on the letter in front of him, as if he was thinking. "How so?" Daybreak did not leave. Seeing Deity finish reading the letter, he asked casually. Deity stood quietly. Under the heavy rain, his clothes were dry and tidy, but the rain kept falling on the letter. The letter was gradually soaked, broken, and finally turned into scraps of paper, falling into the rain on the rooftop. "He wants me to bow my head and let go." Deity's tone was calm. "What do you think?" "Tiannan." Daybreak raised his eyebrows. "Tiannan." Deity's tone became more and more indifferent. Daybreak suddenly fell silent. The chaotic sound of wind and rain still rang out. There was thunder rolling above the sky, and the atmosphere on the rooftop was oppressive and dull. "I can't control it." Daybreak was silent for a long time before he said blandly. There were only him and Deity here, so he spoke casually. "You underestimated the extent of the old master's control of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. You also underestimated the tacit understanding between him and Qin Wei Bai. At that time, we marched into Tiannan, and now we can't stop halfway. You were set up by them. The situation in Tiannan is now out of control. Most importantly, you underestimated the speed of Tianlan's growth." A smile appeared on Daybreak's face. He spoke from the standpoint of God, but his eyes became brighter when he mentioned Li Tianlan's strength. This behavior was very weird, which was enough to prove his entangled position. The invincible realm at the age of 22. Such a result was enough to give everyone confidence. Moreover, I have the utmost confidence. Deity was silent, just like what Daybreak had said. Heavenly South seemed to be in control, but in reality, it was already on the verge of losing control. The dark Azura Hall of Breaking Dawn was now stationed in Tiannan and was the main combat force of the purgatory of Heaven Capital in Tiannan. But most of the members of Sunluo Hall were the elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations who stayed in East Island in the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, pretending to be dead. They were Ning Ziyuan's men. In addition to the Sunluo Hall, the leaders of the purgatory of Heaven Capital that had invested in Tiannan also had other origins. What was the purgatory of Heaven Capital? It was a super force in the dark world created by Deity. It was a behemoth that was constantly developing in East Island with the support of the East Island royal family. But in the end, the purgatory of Heaven Capital was the purgatory of Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in Heaven Capital. 3 years ago, the border war of Zhongzhou State broke out. 3 years ago, the Leaf family, with the last afterglow, confronted the 5 major forces of the dark world that invaded the border of Zhongzhou State. In that fierce battle, there were not many people left in the Leaf family, and some people were destined to sleep because of it. However, there were even more people who directly fell into purgatory after so-called death. They fell into the purgatory of heaven capital. After the real death, there was eternal darkness. And after the illusory death, there was real freedom. The purgatory of heaven capital in East Island appeared. The Li family of Zhongzhou State suffered heavy losses. Behind all these appearances, quietly, a decaying old force was transferring its power to a new superforce. The combination of time was flawless. In 3 years, or even more than 20 years, the veterans who fell into purgatory from the Li family became the backbone of the purgatory of heaven capital. To some extent, deity could not represent the purgatory of heaven capital. Deity represented only deity. Deity and these veterans were the most complete purgatory of heaven capital. This was the purgatory of heaven capital and also the Li family after Nirvana rebirth. The layout of Tianan was the first step for the purgatory of heaven capital to return to Zhongzhou State. If deity wanted to regain Zhongzhou State, he was bound to face countless conspiracies. Tianan was the most suitable entry point. So when Qin Weibai suggested that he march to Tianan, he did not hesitate. And in order to gain a foothold in Tianan, all the people he sent were the backbone who were most familiar with Tianan. Who was most familiar with Tianan? Naturally, it was the people who had stayed the longest in the camp on the border near Tianan and were familiar with Tianan. The people who received the order were in high spirits. Deity did not doubt the loyalty of these people. He could be sure that these people would listen to him completely. But the problem was that these people would listen to his orders, but they would also listen to Li Tianlan's orders. Li Tianlan grew too fast. Now he had the combat capability of the invincible realm. In this way, the entire Tianan became a tailor-made base for Li Tianlan. Ning Ziyuan, who cherished the Li family, was transferred to be the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps. Di Jiang, the biggest resistance of the purgatory of heaven capital, had returned to the Wang family of Beihai. If there were no accidents, he would become the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou State in the near future and serve as the new commander of the Border Control Corps. But the Blood Battalion was still controlled by Dongqing Wudi. The new commander of the Blood Battalion, Thunder God, was a well-deserved core figure of the Dongqing clan. The Southwest Special Warfare Headquarters was occupied by Mount Shu. The Spirit Tortoise Group, the most elite terracotta army of Zhongzhou State, had been transferred to Tianan. What would happen when Li Tianlan arrived at Tianan? He would become the banker in the entire Tianan. Everything around him, whether it was Zhongzhou State or the purgatory of heaven capital. To some extent, it was his power. A 22-year-old young man, his current strength and future potential were worthy of absolute trust. He would occupy Tianan as quickly as possible and let the Li family shine again there. But the purgatory of heaven capital could not do anything. Deity, Li Tianlan, everyone in the purgatory of heaven capital took it for granted that these two people could never have any contradictions or differences. Once deity made a move, the entire purgatory of heaven capital would be confused. Deity could not afford such consequences because he had his responsibilities. I will let go. The rain was heavier. In the roaring rain, deity's voice was a little vague. But I will not lower my head. At this moment, he thought of the old man of the Li family in Qin Weibai. The old master had prepared for today's game for more than 20 years. But the most critical border battle was caused by the Samsara Palace intentionally or unintentionally. How long had Qin Weibai prepared for today's situation? You won't lower your head? Daybreak asked softly. His voice was a little vague and complicated. Is there still a chance? He whispered, Hou is dead. There's a chance. Deity's tone was flat. Don't forget that I still have cooperation with Qin Weibai. He paused and said calmly, Do you know why I sent people to Mount Dibbing to attack summer solstice? His tone was somewhat meaningful. Daybreak thought about it, and his face suddenly changed. I know summer solstice's strength very well. Deity's tone was calm. I also know her state. The reason why I sent our own people to die is that the leaders that time were the 4 most powerful supermasters of the Samsara Palace. If I'm not wrong, it will be difficult for the 4 of them to participate in anything in Snow Country. So, Daybreak's tone was a little dry. The Samsara Palace is weak and is doomed to perish this time. As soon as the master of Samsara Palace and Qinwei die, I will take my time of play with Li Tianlan. He looked at daybreak and whispered, "The final battle in Snow Country will be very lively this time. Maybe in the end, a few half-step invincible realm experts will be enough to decide the whole battle. I plan to take you and Dawn to Snow Country." "Daybreak, can I trust you?" "Phoenix won't go." Daybreak was stunned. "No." There was a flash of tenderness in Deity's eyes. Daybreak opened his mouth. "I will go with you." His voice was a little dry, and his eyes were a little dazed. "I was only 16 years old when I followed you. You used to be a marshal in others' hearts. Now you are His Highness in others' hearts. But in my heart, you are the big brother before and after the treason. The most respectable brother." He stared into Deity's eyes. "You can trust me, but I need a reason. Why did I become like this? In my opinion, there is nothing wrong with Tianlan. Why don't you agree with him?" His tone was very serious. He stared into Deity's eyes, fierce and serious, without flinching. Perhaps his eyes were too sharp. So Deity turned his head and looked at Heaven Capital, which was in the midst of wind and rain. "Because he doesn't deserve it," Deity whispered. When he said this, his eyes were extremely stubborn. Chapter 366. Crossing the sea and the glacier, in the depths of the beautiful yet extremely cold polar region, two black-clothed men silently moved forward in the world of ice and snow. It was summer in the northern hemisphere, but the deepest part of the polar region was still full of ice. Glaciers lingered on the frozen seawater. The sun shone on the glaciers, shining with a dreamy luster. Everything in sight was white, transparent, and holy. The two men in black walked in a clean and pure world. Looking from a distance, they were like the two most striking black spots. They climbed over one glacier after another as if they were walking on flat ground. Summer in the Arctic was the polar day. Standing on the pole, front, back, left, right, east, west, north, south, they were all south. The moment the scorching sun set in the south, before the darkness fell, the sun rose again. There was no night in the polar day, only day. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. The two men in black walked all the way in the polar region in silence. The two black-clothed people were a man and a woman. The woman walking in front had a tall and voluptuous figure. Her entire body was wrapped in a black cloak, and from her back, she could be said to be mighty and strong. The man following behind her was thin and even a little thin. The wide cloak was draped over his body, making him look empty, but vaguely giving off a sense of elegance. He silently followed the tall woman in front of him, silent like a shadow. The rising summer sun shone in the depths of the polar region. The sun dyed every corner of the polar region golden. A man and a woman climbed the glacier in front and stood at the top. The deepest part of the entire base suddenly appeared in front of them. This was the coldest place in the core of the entire polar region. The wind and snow whistled under the sun, with biting cold and sharp ice chips. A mountain appeared in front of the man in black. A mountain completely condensed from ice. It was not realistic to say that it was a glacier. In front of the two, it was simply an endless mountain range. The mountain range was tall and magnificent, boundless. The holy white and the sky seemed to be connected, which was a kind of breathtaking magnificence and magnificence. Behind the glacier was the core of the polar region and the endless deep sea, which was beyond human reach. "It's here." After a long silence, the tall and plump woman took the initiative to break the silence and whispered, "Barental Glacier." Barental. It was the ancient language of a small ethnic group in the northernmost part of the snow country. It meant the end of the world. The man behind the woman took off the cloak that made him uncomfortable. He took a deep breath. Under the sun, it was a handsome face that very few people in the dark world knew, but it was indeed standing at the peak of the dark world's martial power. "Nice scenery." Lin Fengding looked around and chuckled. Maybe I should go to the South Pole after this. He had been to too many places over the years. They were beautiful, but there were very few places that were purer than the polar region. I like it here. There's no taste of the mortal world. It's like heaven, but also like hell. You like it? The tall woman turned around and looked at Lin Fengting. The hood of the cloak was very big, and it perfectly covered her entire face. Her eyes were hidden in the darkness, and her gaze was a little blurry. Lin Fengting had already cooperated with Samsara Palace. But in the entire Samsara Palace, there was only one person who could pull Lin Fengting from Mormons to the deepest part of the polar region. It could only be the most mysterious master of Samsara Palace. Palace Lord doesn't like it? Lin Fengting laughed and looked at the Barental Glacier in front of him, which was connected to heaven and earth. From another angle, he could also see the endless deep sea behind the glacier. The glacier was white. The sea behind the glacier was blue and a little black, with a kind of majestic pressure that made people desperate. It was black and white. It was like heaven, but also like hell. Since you like it, how about I give a glacier to you? The master of Samsara Palace said. Everyone in Samsara Palace called Lin Fengting Mr., but others called him Mr. out of respect and politeness. But when the master of Samsara Palace said it, there was no emotional fluctuation at all. What's the use of giving it to me? Lin Fengting said with a smile. Just take a look. Can I live in it? Living in it may not be worse than living in the headquarters of the Lin clan. The master of Samsara Palace pointed at the glacier in front of her and said calmly, "This is what I'm looking for." Lin Fengting was stunned, looking at the magnificent glacier in front of him that seemed to occupy the entire polar region. The master of Samsara Palace asked him out just to say that she wanted to find something. Lin Fengting didn't ask what it was. With his strength, he didn't have to worry about anyone plotting against him. Until now, Lin Fengting didn't know that the master of Samsara Palace was looking for this glacier. Here, Lin Fengting was a little hesitant. Now, in the whole dark world, perhaps he was the only one who knew the identity of the master of Samsara Palace. Lin Fengting had seen this mysterious master more than once in Linen. He knew her past and could foresee her future. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made the decision to let her control the Lin clan for the next 20 years. However, this woman's thinking was too imaginative. She had such a great advantage in some aspects that it was difficult for smart people to thoroughly understand her plan. This is the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance. The master of Samsara Palace said in a calm tone that could be said to be earth-shattering news. The real headquarters. It's inside the Barental Glacier. Lin Fengting's body shook instinctively. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance? In the Dark World, it was not difficult to find the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance at all, because they were different from the Samsara Palace. This was an alliance. It was an alliance with Snow Country as the core, and its tentacles extended to more than a dozen countries in Eastern Europe. Its sphere of influence was super large, but relatively loose. The headquarters of such a force could be said to be the most conspicuous place. In everyone's intelligence, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance should be in the polar circle not far from Mormons, on a glacier. It was not in the core of the polar region, but inside the largest glacier in the polar region. The distance between the two headquarters was at least thousands of kilometers. So, like the Samsara Palace, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance and Mormons is fake. Lin Fengting was shocked and immediately returned to normal. After all, he was just an ally of the Samsara Palace. The Lin clan didn't enter the secular world. No matter how mysterious the Polar Ground Alliance was, it had nothing to do with him. That's also true, because it is indeed the place where the Polar Ground Alliance handles daily affairs, but the headquarters here is more hidden. Only a few core figures of the Polar Ground Alliance are qualified to enter here, and some small-scale but sophisticated laboratories inside the Polar Ground Alliance are also here. The master of Samsara Palace explained meticulously. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. You knew this place before, didn't you? Just some rough clues, very vague. This was not a place I paid attention to before. The master of Samsara Palace's tone was calm. Some vague clues can be found in the most hidden headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in a few days. Lin Fengding obviously didn't believe it. It's 3 years. The master of Samsara Palace turned to look at Lin Fengting. From 3 years ago, the people of the Samsara Palace were looking for it with those vague clues, until a few days ago. Lin Fengding looked at the glacier in front of him. There was nothing strange about the glacier, cold and holy. But inside the glacier was the headquarters of the superpower in Eastern Europe, or even the entire Dark World, which had the most complicated structure, or it could be said to be bloated. Lin Fengding felt it incredible. It might not be difficult to open up the glacier, but organizations with a long history like the Polar Ground Alliance had deep foundations, which were completely different from the newly rising Samsara Palace. Why did they need to build such a hidden headquarters here? The Samsara Palace needed to be hidden. In the final analysis, it was because they were not strong enough and their foundations were poor. The Lin clan was unknown because they were hiding from the world, and only their headquarters were hiding from the world. The branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world were quite confident in their own territory. Just like the Wang family of Beihai. Their headquarters was in Beihai province, on Mount Dibing. But for hundreds of years, who dared to provoke them? Most of the people with such courage were dead. That was the strength and confidence. The Polar Ground Alliance should have such confidence, but why did they build their headquarters here? If it was not because of the lack of confidence, it could only mean that there was a great secret here. Lin Fengding sat down on the glacier. The howling snow and ice chips in the sky suddenly stopped for a moment as he sat down. The world was quiet. Do you need me to take action today? Lin Fengding asked. Mormons was at least 1,000 kilometers away from here. It was the place of the final battle, but the master of Samsara Palace appeared here. No matter what her purpose was, she couldn't be here for sightseeing. Yes, the master of Samsara Palace nodded. To what extent? To kill Tyrant? Lin Fengding narrowed his eyes. The Polar Ground Alliance. Tyrant. He ranked 8th on the new divine list, holding the murderous weapon of Snow Country, Mountain Shatterer. Both he and the murderous weapon were absolute power-type masters. When he attacked, he even had the courage to tear mountains and fill the ocean. The master of Samsara Palace ranked 4th on the divine list. But according to Lin Fengting's understanding of the master of Samsara Palace, if Tyrant held Mountain Shatterer when Blue Sky Underworld was not around, the master of Samsara Palace could hardly be Tyrant's opponent under normal conditions. Even if she could win, she would inevitably be seriously injured. On the premise that Mountain Shatterer runs out of energy, seriously injure Tyrant. The master of Samsara Palace whispered, "A living tyrant is more in the interest of the Samsara Palace." Is there any interest in the Samsara Palace? Lin Fengding looked at the master of Samsara Palace with a meaningful look in his eyes. The Dark World was in chaos, but the situation was getting clearer and clearer. Northern Europe, Tiannan, North America, and South America were battlefields everywhere. The forces of the Samsara Palace were operating in various battlefields, so they suffered heavy losses. Before the final battle began, the Samsara Palace was already crippled. Now the flames of war were about to burn in Eastern Europe, led by the Samsara Palace. Even the most optimistic people found it hard to believe that the Samsara Palace had any way out. Destruction seemed to be the only ending. Destruction was imminent. What was the use of the so-called interests? Of course, the master of Samsara Palace's tone was certain and firm. Only then did Lin Fengding remember that the real headquarters of the Samsara Palace was in Zhongzhou State. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is in Zhongzhou State. You are in Snow Country, so the real headquarters will definitely be handed over to someone worthy of your trust. I think I understand why Military Counselor and Saint didn't come to Snow Country. The real headquarters of the Samsara Palace is controlled by Military Counselor and Saint, right? The master of Samsara Palace was silent. The code name Military Counselor, as the name suggests, I can probably understand his position in the Samsara Palace. Saint, this title is interesting. Is he your disciple? Lin Fengding's smile was a little strange and playful, as if he had thought of something interesting. "He doesn't recognize my martial arts," the master of Samsara Palace said blandly, "and I have nothing to teach him. But there's a piece of information left by a real chosen one in the Samsara Palace. If there is no accident, that information is enough for him to step into the invincible realm at the last moment. Saint can also be regarded as a disciple of the Chosen One." The Chosen One. A touch of regret flashed in Lin Fengting's eyes. He knew who the Chosen One in the Master of Samsara Palace was. "How do you explain that information to Saint?" Lin Fengting asked in a complicated tone. The Master of Samsara Palace did not speak. Lin Fengting seemed to understand something. He nodded and said to himself, "It turns out that Saint also knows your identity. So, it sounds like a deal between the Samsara Palace and the Saints?" Silence responded to him. "Then such a person is not worthy of your complete trust. So, everything in the Samsara Palace is in the hands of military counselor? Why do you trust military counselor?" Lin Fengting seemed to be a chatterbox and kept talking. "Because he is a smart person." The Master of Samsara Palace answered in a simple tone, as if she did not want to talk more. Lin Fengting thought for a while and nodded in agreement. "He is indeed smart." The Master of Samsara Palace took out an ancient pocket watch and looked at it. The pocket watch had a complicated dial showing the time and date. The night of July 26th. It was already the morning of July 26th in Zhongzhou State. The Master of Samsara Palace raised her head and looked at the scorching sun hanging high in the polar day. "Today, you only need to help me block Mountain Shatterer," the Master of Samsara Palace said softly. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Mountain Shatterer was extremely powerful. Without Mountain Shatterer, Tyrant's strength will be reduced. The Master of Samsara Palace alone was enough. "Tell me your plan," Lin Fengting said calmly. "The whole plan. The whole plan is the Polar Ground Alliance." The Master of Samsara Palace said clearly, "This is the battlefield I chose a long time ago. After today, there will be new opportunities in the dark world." The Master of Samsara Palace looked at the glacier in front of her and asked, "What is the Polar Ground Alliance?" Before Lin Fengting answered, she had already said to herself, "The so-called Polar Ground Alliance, the alliance is the most important. It is a super force supported by Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries. The oligarchs of Snow Country, the wealthy families of the surrounding countries, and some dark forces in Eastern Europe form an interest group. The final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago was just a rehearsal. It can be regarded as the first half of the plan, and the second half is in Snow Country." Lin Fengting listened quietly. Everyone has ambition. The stronger the strength, the greater the power, and the higher the status, the more uncontrollable the ambition. It can be said that the Polar Ground Alliance controls the power of Snow Country and more than a dozen surrounding countries in some aspects. But is it really so? The Polar Ground Alliance was established by the Eastern European countries. It is better to say that the Polar Ground Alliance is constrained by the Eastern European countries. If you're a tyrant, you have the seemingly largest superforce in the dark world, but you have to face the constraints from Snow Country and other countries all day long. Are you willing to do that? What is a tyrant like that? Puppet. Lin Fengting blurted out subconsciously. That's why the Polar Ground Alliance had internal strife a few years ago. Because the Polar Ground Alliance also wanted to change, or Tyrant himself wanted to change. He set up the headquarters here and brought his most trusted subordinates here. He wanted to develop slowly and finally get rid of the shackles of various countries to become the only real tyrant in the dark world of Eastern Europe. The Master of Samsara Palace seemed to smile, but her smile was a little cold. What the Samsara Palace did was to cooperate with Tyrant. But we move a little fast. After seizing the opportunity, we accelerated Tyrant's plan by 10 times or even dozens of times. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react. Lin Fengting just figured out a little meaning, and the Master of Samsara Palace had made a clear conclusion. Tyrant's secret action was tantamount to challenging the bottom line of the Eastern European countries. The Samsara Palace secretly promoted and accelerated this process. The Samsara Palace might fail, but Tyrant would definitely fail. As long as Tyrant was seriously injured today and the headquarters here was exposed, the Polar Ground Alliance would not only have internal strife, but completely fall apart. The Eastern European countries waiting for the opportunity will use all means to deal with Tyrant. The powerful families of the Polar Ground Alliance will also fight for power and profit internally. The Polar Ground Alliance without Tyrant is still the Polar Ground Alliance. This is a great benefit that no one, including Snow Country, can ignore. Therefore, the Dark World will have a decisive battle in Eastern Europe, and the countries in Eastern Europe will also fight openly and secretly for the Polar Ground Alliance. If different countries want to rebuild the Polar Ground Alliance and get the real leadership, they will inevitably contact other superpowers. The master of Samsara Palace paused and suddenly laughed. Ha! Lin Fengding only felt his scalp tingle. He stared at the master of Samsara Palace, as if he were looking at a madman. He suddenly wondered if his decision was right. It was the madman in front of him who took advantage of the opportunity of Tyrant seeking change and directly decided the place of the final battle for the Dark World that had been in war for 3 years. The most important thing was that even the war in the Dark World, it was also provoked by the Samsara Palace. What would such a final battle look like? All the countries in Eastern Europe would intervene secretly. More than a dozen countries would fight openly and secretly, and even kill each other secretly. Several superpowers in the Dark World had their own positions. The superpowers would form alliances, and the countries would form alliances. But the so-called allies could betray them at any time. This was a huge benefit that could drive anyone crazy. The Eastern European countries would go crazy. All the superpowers in the Dark World would go crazy. Tyrant would also go crazy. All the ambitious Invincible Realm experts would also go crazy. All of them. This would be an extremely chaotic era and an extremely crazy final battle. Compared with the final battle in Heaven Capital 3 years ago, this was the real general trend of the Dark World. Lin Fengding didn't know what such madness meant. Did it mean a new era after the end of an era? Or, he stared at the master of Samsara Palace. Not even for a moment. What are you looking at? The master of Samsara Palace's expression was hidden in the cloak, but her voice was a little colder. I really don't like you now. Lin Fengding laughed. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak, but her aura gradually became cold. Her eyes were fixed on the glacier ahead. Be careful. Although Lin Fengding didn't like the master of Samsara Palace, he still reminded her. The master of Samsara Palace didn't speak. Her body completely straightened in an instant. The ice and snow roared past. The black cloak on her flew up and made a loud noise. Lin Fengding sat where he was, motionless, as if he was extremely quiet. The master of Samsara Palace took a step forward. The whole space was suddenly torn apart. Her figure moved very fast. Under the bright summer sun, she turned into a black line. In just an instant, she appeared above the Barental Glacier. The glacier was silent. The master of Samsara Palace opened her hands, as if she was embracing the whole world. An ethereal but extremely condensed sword intent condensed the moment she opened her hands. The sword energy rushed up to the sky. The vague and sharp sword energy traversed the whole sky and covered the glacier. The wind and snow on the ground were rolling wildly. The ultimate sword intent was rising. Finally it fell. In the depths of the polar region, the Barental Glacier, known as the end of the world, shook. Cracks spread on the glacier one after another. Huge waves rose in the sea behind the glacier. The earth shook and the mountains shook. The sword light spread to the extreme. The cloak on the master of Samsara Palace bloomed completely. Her body lit up. Boundless sword light was released around her in the most thorough manner, and the surging sword chi rained down in a frenzy. On the Barental Glacier, a piece of solid ice with a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded in a loud sound. A roar full of anger and majesty suddenly sounded inside the glacier. Then a louder roar sounded. It was a clear and strange gunshot. A ball of misty light lit up the glacier, surrounded by sword light again. The light was dim, misty, and illusory. With a subtle yellow color, it kept spreading in the sword intent of the glacier. Wherever the yellow light passed, all the glaciers and countless sword intents collapsed. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer. Mountain Shatterer with one shot. It was the late night of July 26th in the polar region. In the polar region, the scorching sun hung high in the night. Before the night passed, a piece of explosive news swept through the entire dark world like a hurricane. In the depths of the polar region, the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance in the Barental Glacier was completely exposed. The master of Samsara Palace entered the headquarters of the Polar Ground Alliance alone. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer opened fire. Tyrant, the leader of the Polar Ground Alliance, was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. None of the intelligence mentioned Lin Fengting. And almost at the same time, inside the Polar Ground Alliance, many powerful families announced their withdrawal from the alliance at the same time. Snow Country also officially issued a statement that Tyrant of the Polar Ground Alliance was a traitor of Snow Country. Eastern European countries. They were obliged to help Snow Country kill Tyrant. Different news and different lives swept through the dark world. Everyone understood what the news meant. It meant that the Polar Ground Alliance, the superpower with the largest sphere of influence, the largest number of people, and the most bloated organization in the dark world, finally collapsed completely in just a few hours after several years of preparation. It also meant that the countries in Eastern Europe, including Snow Country, which had the largest territory in the world, had no dark power that could be used. Tyrant was seriously injured. The master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. The murderous weapon Mountain Shatterer. The murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld. The Polar Ground Alliance. The Samsara Palace. All the interests were in Eastern Europe at this time. Overnight, it seemed that everyone had a reason to go to Eastern Europe. Chapter 367. It was stormy in Snow Country. The intersection of the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean was calm. The world was bustling. The sky was the most beautiful, and the ocean was the quietest. Looking at the world from the deep sea 500 meters below, the world was like a picture that was frozen yet slowly flowing. It was colorful and breathtakingly beautiful. Wang Tianzong had stayed in this underwater world for 3 days. He rarely appreciated the scenery in the deep sea. Most of the time, he was silent or meditating, silently adjusting his state. Under his feet was a deep-sea submarine that cruised in the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean all year round. Almost all of them were new models independently developed by Beihai Province. The whole submarine showed the standard extreme style of the Wang family of Beihai. The submarine was small in size, and its combat capability was completely negligible. At the beginning of the design of the submarine codenamed Cloud, the designer did not intend for it to have any combat capability. Most of the places that could be equipped with weapons were modified into large and small engine cabins. For stronger stealth performance, Cloud even sacrificed a lot of armor thickness. There were only 6 such military submarines in the entire Wang family of Beihai, and they formed 3 squads. It was not because it was so high-end that the Wang family of Beihai could not afford it, but because it could not find a buyer at all. Such a submarine was completely abnormal. In terms of speed and stealth performance, Cloud was completely at the world's first-class level, but its combat capability and defense capability were also at the bottom of the world's first-class level. No country needed such a military submarine. Its only function was to search for resources in the deep sea more quickly and comprehensively. This was also the only use of the Wang family of Beihai to develop it. And now, Cloud, which was not well received even within the Wang family of Beihai, ushered in the most glorious moments since its service. Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou State had been quietly waiting inside Cloud for 3 days. It was already late at night on July 29th. There were less than 48 hours before the maneuver of the 2 academies of Zhongzhou State officially began. It was the third day after Wang Tianzong appeared on the edge of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The sea was calm. The deep sea was calm. Cloud was quietly suspended in the deep sea, motionless. Wang Tianzong, who spent most of his time meditating, opened his eyes from a somewhat narrow room, slowly came to the submarine cabin, and looked out of the window at the deep sea. The deep sea was not dark even at night. Less than 10 kilometers away, the light from the headquarters of Samsara Palace shone on the sea. The dazzling light pierced directly into the sea. The sea within a radius of tens of kilometers was brightly lit under the strong light. The brilliance was simply dazzling. Wang Tianzong silently looked at the light that reached hundreds of meters into the deep sea. He looked calm and thoughtful. "Your Majesty," Xianming appeared behind Wang Tianzong. "Wanted to say something." Wang family of Beihai. As the head of all the intelligence agencies of the Wang family of Beihai, Xianming could be said to be Wang Tianzong's most trusted confidant. This position was not very dazzling, but it was extremely sensitive. There is almost no other family in the dark world like the Wang family of Beihai, which had gone through hundreds of years of trials and tribulations and had always maintained a rising momentum. The intelligence system of the Wang family of Beihai was even more huge and complicated. Sitting in this position, Xianming was like a pair of eyes hidden in the dark of the Wang family of Beihai. Wang family Shui Ocean. Ming and Wang. His Majesty asked very general questions, so he was not sure what he was asking about. Xianming thought about it and said slowly, "Snow Country is very lively, or it can't be more lively. Within 3 days, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Zhang family of South America, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Heroes Club, the Shadow Throne of the European Union, the Dark Knights, the Men in Black of Star State, and almost all the forces appeared in Eastern Europe. At present, the Bayes family in Eastern Europe has officially announced that Knights Templars is their ally. As time goes by, there will be more and more similar things. The Bayes family in Eastern Europe. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Bayes family could be said to be one of the core components of the alliance. Its status was supreme in a small country in Eastern Europe. The collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance caused drastic changes in Eastern Europe. The wealthy families in the alliance, which had never been a monolithic one, were even more fragmented. The Bayes family cooperated with Knights Templars, and other wealthy families would definitely choose to cooperate with other forces. Such cooperation seemed to enhance his own strength, but even Wang Tianzong could not predict what the final result would be. The situation was too chaotic. Even the Sword Emperor had to be careful in the chaos. If he was a little careless, the so-called Sword Emperor would be easily crushed by the general trend. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and suddenly asked, "What's the attitude of Snow Country?" Silence. Xianming's tone was concise. Except for declaring the tyrant a traitor, Snow Country has been silent. How about Beihai Province? Wang Tianzong continued to ask. "It's fine for the time being," Xianming answered without hesitation. Even though he was deep in the sea, in the past few days he had never stopped contacting the outside world. His phone had been ringing 24 hours a day. The great changes in the dark world were just the beginning. Wang Tianzong's cautiousness and seriousness were transferred to him, which meant endless pressure and urgency. "It's fine for the time being," Wang Tianzong whispered to himself and sneered. It didn't seem a bad thing to be safe for the time being, but it was not a good thing. The geographical location of Beihai Province was extremely special, and the Wang family of Beihai was even more powerful. Although they were in Asia, they could be said to be close to Eastern Europe. When the upheaval in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, other superpowers in the dark world might not have the energy to take care of the Wang family of Beihai, but none of the wealthy families of the Polar Ground Alliance came to the Wang family of Beihai to ask for cooperation. This kind of unscathed was enough to explain some problems. "Any news from Tyrant?" Wang Tianzong asked. "There's no news for the time being. Tyrant was seriously injured by the master of Samsara Palace that day, and we still have no clues." Xianming shook his head. "Fine, Tyrant. Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said calmly, "After you get the news about him, you go to see him in person and tell him that the Wang family of Beihai can heal his injury and even help him borrow a murderous weapon. As long as he is willing to come to Beihai province to heal his injury, I can give him a chance to make a comeback." Xianming lifted his head with a surprised face. It was not surprising that Wang Tianzong drew Tyrant to his side. He was surprised that Wang Tianzong was willing to borrow a murderous weapon for Tyrant. The 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World could be said to be the only power that could be compared with the invincible realm in hundreds of years. The first murderous weapon, Human Emperor, opened fire on the border 3 years ago after more than a decade of silence. When Night Spirit was destroyed, Blue Sky Underworld sprayed sparks. In the final battle of Heaven Capital, the legend of Qin and the Shadow the Ripper had confronted each other. More than a year ago, the Dark Saint Judgment shook Northern Europe. Half a month ago, Setting Sun seriously injured Gu Xingyan. 3 days ago, after the sound of mountain shatter, the Polar Ground Alliance completely collapsed. Thinking of this, Xianming was shocked. Only then did he realize that in just 3 years, more than half of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World had been in a state of energy storage at this time. There were still 5 murderous weapons that could be used. Which one did Wang Tianzong want to borrow? Almost without thinking, Xianming already had the answer in his mind. If the Immortality Potion, the Devil Troop, and the Heaven Punishment Troop belonged to the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai, then the murderous weapon that Wang Tianzong wanted to borrow this time was the friendship that the Wang family of Beihai had given to the outside world. It was recognized in the Dark World as a murderous weapon second only to the Human Emperor. Its power was not as good as the Human Emperor, but it was the fastest murderous weapon among the 12 murderous weapons. That was recognized as the fastest speed. Wang Tianzong drew Tyrant to his side. Tyrant was an ally. Who did Wang Tianzong want to use the fast, murderous weapon in the hands of his ally to deal with? Xianming thought of the past of the Wang family of Beihai and all the peak experts in the Dark World today. He sighed in his heart. To deal with the former friendship with the former friendship? He looked at Wang Tianzong, but only saw absolute calmness on his face. Xianming agreed in a low voice and sent a message with his mobile phone. He stood quietly behind Wang Tianzong and did not move. Wang Tianzong glanced at him. "Your Majesty, today is the 29th. Xianming's voice was gentle. "The maneuver of the 2 academies in Zhongzhou State will start the day after tomorrow. There's still time." Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and said slowly, "What are you waiting for?" Xianming couldn't help asking. Waiting for someone. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold. He suddenly asked, "What do you think the form of the Samsara Palace's existence in the Dark World is?" This inexplicable question made Xianming at a loss. He was silent for a long time before he whispered, "What form?" "I don't know." Wang Tianzong shook his head. "But I can be sure that no matter what form they are in, their existence is different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. The Samsara Palace is too mysterious, and we have too little information. I can't determine the form of the Samsara Palace's existence, so I can't determine the value of this so-called headquarters. In this case, I'm willing to waste some time and wait for something more valuable. What do you think an injured person wants to do the most?" Wang Tianzong answered his own question. "Of course it's to heal, and it's to heal in the safest place. Where is safer than the headquarters of the Samsara Palace? It's not far from Snow Country. I think the master of Samsara Palace will come back." Wang Tianzong whispered, "That's my goal." The dazzling light radiated in all directions with the headquarters of the Samsara Palace as the core. In the center of the exquisite and beautiful island, there was an information hall that controlled the security of the entire island. The light shone from the island to the surroundings. Wherever it passed, all the images appeared on the huge screen in the information hall. Not only the impact, but some abnormal signal frequencies would also appear in the hall after being detected by the radar. So in theory, the places around the headquarters of the Samsara Palace that were covered by the light, whether in the sky or in the deep sea, had no targets that could hide. unless the other party's technology was far beyond the radar of the Samsara Palace. More than a dozen technicians of the Samsara Palace were busy in the hall full of instruments, searching for all the suspicious images and signals. Everything was normal within dozens of kilometers of the headquarters. The images were normal. The signals were normal. A bald, middle-aged man quietly stared at a small screen in the big screen. On the screen, in the depths of the sea less than 10 kilometers away from the headquarters, an imperceptible signal flickered. The signal was not suspicious, because the signal sent by the other party was exactly the same frequency as the signal returned by the radar of the headquarters. The middle-aged man silently looked at the screen in front of him and finally opened a communication window on the screen. The communication was quickly connected. A tall and plump woman in a black cloak appeared on the screen. Her breath was weak, and she was silent. "Your Highness, it has been confirmed that the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, Wang Tianzong, has arrived at the headquarters. Now he is less than 10 kilometers away from us." The middle-aged man looked at the figure on the screen, bowed respectfully, and said softly, "Confirmed." On the screen, the tall woman under the cloak had a hoarse voice. "Yes, I can confirm," the middle-aged man said softly. He looked up at the small screen where the signal was concentrated. On the screen, the signal with the same frequency as the radar of the Samsara Palace flashed again. Nothing unusual, but the fact that there was nothing unusual was the greatest anomaly. The rise of the Samsara Palace was too short. In terms of technological development alone, even 10 Samsara palaces could hardly catch up with the Wang family of Beihai. So under normal circumstances, it was impossible for the Wang family of Beihai to search for the signal of the Cloud submarine. But in fact, the signal sent by Cloud Smoke had been flashing in the information hall of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. For 3 days, it had not changed its position at all. It was not because of the advanced technology of the Samsara Palace that it could do this. The only explanation was that the radar used by the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was also the latest model developed by the Wang family of Beihai, and it had never been sold to the public. So the feedback of Cloud Smoke and the radar signal was exactly the same. Obviously, Wang Tianzong did not know this. That was why he'd been quietly staying in the cloud, waiting for the return of the master of Samsara Palace. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace had already known the location of Wang Tianzong's submarine, but the Samsara Palace did not intend to let Wang Tianzong down. On the communication screen, the woman in a black cloak stood up and said calmly, "I'm on my way." "Welcome." The middle-aged man's voice was a little trembling with indescribable complexity. He bowed deeply to the screen. "Welcome back, Your Highness." The communication screen was hung up directly. The middle-aged man did not straighten up for a long time. His Highness was indeed returning. However, his return this time clearly had an unusual meaning. In the information hall, the staff stood up one by one and left the hall in turn. "Doctor, aren't you evacuating?" When the last staff member left, he subconsciously asked. "No." The middle-aged and balding doctor smiled. His face was very gentle. "I'm tired. I need to rest." The last staff member hesitated and turned to leave. The doctor turned around and adjusted the huge screen behind him to the maximum. Countless small screens disappeared on the big screen. On the whole screen, the whole scene of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace was clearly reflected. The palaces were continuous, and the birds were singing in a variety of patterns. The night was beautiful. A helicopter flew through the night sky and landed on the ground with the roar of the rotors. The hatch door opened, and a figure wrapped in a black cloak slowly walked down. She was tall and plump, but it seemed that because of the serious injury, her body was not straight. "Welcome back." The doctor looked at the man in black on the screen and muttered to himself, "Welcome to death." Returning was also a death. Chapter 368. Cloud was keenly aware of the signal that landed on the headquarters of Samsara Palace from a high altitude. The signal was a small red dot. This was the color of the signal that did not belong to them. It appeared on the screen of Cloud and kept flashing. Finally, It completely merged with the dense signals of the headquarters of Samsara Palace and became completely still. Xian Ming, who was standing behind Wang Tianzong, was a little excited. He also had a complicated and nervous feeling of being involved in the general trend. He didn't expect that His Majesty had waited here for 3 days, and he really found his prey. Was it the master of Samsara Palace? If it was really the master of Samsara Palace who returned to the headquarters, what did it mean? In a few days after the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, the Samsara Palace was completely destroyed. From a fall of Night Spirit 3 years ago, to the final battle of Heaven Capital, to the 3-year war in the Dark World, the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, and the competition in Eastern Europe. If the Samsara Palace was destroyed today, how chaotic would the Dark World be? He subconsciously glanced at Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm and indifferent. He didn't know if the latest signal was the master of Samsara Palace, but he could see it. Take a look, Wang Tianzong said. Xianming picked up the walkie-talkie in the submarine and gave an order. The technicians of the Wang family of Beihai, who had been busy for several days and only needed the last step, broke through the network of the headquarters of Samsara Palace almost immediately. The firewall of the headquarters of Samsara Palace reacted violently. Alarms and warning signals appeared on every computer in the headquarters. The whole process took less than 3 seconds, and then the screen in front of Wang Tianzong suddenly turned dark. The headquarters of Samsara Palace had completely cut off the network. The process was very short, but Wang Tianzong had seen what he wanted to see. A helicopter was parked in the middle of the island of the headquarters of Samsara Palace. Beside the helicopter, a woman with a weak aura stood there, wrapped in a cloak. The island was full of bright lights that could dispel the night. Her figure stood in the light, a little blurred and dazzling. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes. All the calmness and indifference completely disappeared from him. He stood quietly, but his whole person showed a completely indescribable sharpness. The grievances with the Li family many years ago, the friendship with the Lin clan, the loss after attacking Li Honghe, the anger after summer solstice was seriously injured by the sneak attack, and the threat brought to him by Li Tianlan, who was as amazing as the Chosen One. Everything was accumulated in the depths of his heart. After 3 days of meditation, his sword intent had reached its true peak. Wang Tianzong slowly turned around. "Your Majesty, be careful." Xianming took a deep breath and said cautiously, "Even now, we can't rule out that the headquarters of Samsara Palace is a trap." Wang Tianzong smiled and said nothing. He was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. With a sword in hand, there are no traps or conspiracies in the world. There was no day and night in the headquarters of Samsara Palace. The lights seemed to surround this exquisite island forever. The sunlight faded. Light appeared. The dazzling light shrouded every corner of the island, illuminating everything. There was no day or night here, nor was there a starry sky. There was only light. The light had been alternating on the island for 3 days and nights. Countless light beams slowly rotated on the island. It shone on the sky and penetrated the ocean. The beam of light flowed in the night with a psychedelic trajectory. The helicopter landed at the highest point of the island. The area that could be regarded as a landing pad was not large, but it was extremely flat. The poor woman hidden in the black cloak stood quietly at the highest place of the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, overlooking the entire headquarters. The headquarters of the Samsara Palace was extremely beautiful, but the light was too pale, making everything lose its original color. She stood silently and did not move for a long time. Several figures walked over slowly in the light of the island. They came behind her and bowed in silence. The wind blew on the island. Her black cloak fluttered with the wind, looking a little cold. Under the pale light, she, dressed in black, was like a little black spot that should not have appeared. "How is it?" In the night wind, she suddenly spoke in a stiff tone. "The Devil Troop has withdrawn a week ago. Most of our researchers have also left. Everything is ready." A man with a long sword on his back took a step forward and replied calmly. The man's clothes were as white as snow, which seemed to be completely integrated with the dazzling light. He was extremely handsome and had shoulder-length hair, which was not common among men. The night wind blew his hair, and the long sword on his back trembled slightly. His whole person showed a kind of outstanding handsomeness and wildness. He was a swordsman, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara Palace. She turned around and glanced at the swordsman. She also glanced at them. The swordsman was surrounded by experts who were famous in the dark world. Azura, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Azure Dragon, the super master of the Samsara Palace. Doctor, the super master of the Samsara Palace. In addition, there were several heavyweights who were not on the list of super masters, but were no less important than the super masters in the Samsara Palace. "Don't go," she asked. "We are willing to die for your highness." Everyone said in unison. This time they did not bow. Everyone stood straight in front of her with a peaceful expression. Under the cloak, she turned around and looked at the undulating and rotating light column over the headquarters of the Samsara Palace. The light column shook the night with a subtle frequency, blurred and dreamy. Under the cloak, her eyes changed from trance to coldness. She lowered her head and looked at the sea. The sea was sparkling with the light. Her eyes seemed to pass through the sea and fall into the depths of the sea. "There it is." She stretched out her hand and pointed to the sea. Boom! The whole sea suddenly shook. There seemed to be an unimaginably huge force surging and boiling at the bottom of the sea. The huge force, like a mountain and a sea, broke through the sea with incredible violence and strength. The whole island seemed to be trembling slightly. All eyes focused in an instant and stared at the sea as if they wanted to see through the bottom of the sea. The bottom of the sea was not the bottom. 500 meters below the sea, there was water above and below. The majestic pressure was overwhelming from all directions, as if to completely obliterate all Wang Tianzong's vitality. The environment in the deep sea was quiet and silent. Wang Tianzong stood in the water as if he were stepping on the ground. The whole sea was surging silently. He could feel the crisp sound of his bones under the impact of the sea, and he could feel the sharp pain that his body would be torn and crushed at any time. But his eyes were still calm without any emotion. There were no ups and downs in the deep sea, but the extremely terrible turbulence went all the way south. Wang Tianzong's feet were like two anchors nailed to the deep sea. He stood steadily, adapting to the pressure that almost suffocated him, motionless. The sword intent stirred the sea with difficulty. A sword domain with a radius of a few meters appeared around Wang Tianzong's body. Wang Tianzong did not move or breathe. The huge tide around him roared past. Gradually adapting to the pressure, Wang Tianzong slowly took a step in the sea. The sea went south. He went north. Going against the water, the overwhelming water pressure seemed to become his power in an instant. His foot fell. The whole sea was boiling in an instant. The deep sea, with Wang Tianzong as the center, instantly turned into white waves all over the deep sea. A large area of the sea was completely twisted in the completely violent sword intent and power. The ever-growing submarine cloud was directly pushed out in the twisted sea. The unimaginable power spread from the bottom of the sea to the surface. The ebbing sea began to fluctuate, and the waves were endless. Wang Tianzong took the second step forward. His movements were extremely slow, but his power and sword intent were getting stronger and stronger. Wang Tianzong held the long sword in his hand tightly. This was the sharpest famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai now. The sword was called Listen to the Sea. Listen to the sea in the deep sea. The third step fell. Wang Tianzong's eyes focused instantly. In the crazy and oppressive sea, he suddenly thought of his life and the glory of the Wang family of Beihai that lasted for hundreds of years. He thought of many people: Summer Solstice, Wang Shengxiao, Wang Yuedong, Wang Xiaoyao, Li Honghe, Li Kuangtu, Lin Fengting. There were too many people. With a beauty by his side and a strong enemy by his side, he was invincible and powerful. What did he want in his life? The fourth step fell. The sword domain, composed of pure sword energy, expanded wildly, squeezing the sea. Water was the softest, but it was also the fiercest. The moment the endless sea was squeezed out, it pressed down with a heavier momentum. The sword domain struggled to maintain and was on the verge of collapse. His body seemed to be breaking, and it became difficult to breathe. This feeling was so familiar. In a trance, Wang Tianzong laughed, which was extremely clear. He thought of what he wanted. Everything he had done in his life, including all the crimes, despicable, insidious, and shameless, was to protect the honor of the Wang family of Beihai. The honor and foundation that lasted for hundreds of years were so powerful, so vigorous, and so heavy. Heavier than the sea. He would not allow anyone to destroy this honor and majesty. Wang Tianzong's palm held the hilt of Listen to the Sea. The fifth step fell. He drew the sword. The bright sword edge went up. His figure was also going up. Wang Tianzong's eyes were condensed and focused. There was no emotion in his eyes, only sword intent. Samsara Palace? More than that. He wanted the whole world to see this sword stroke. So what if the Polar Ground Alliance collapsed? So what if Eastern Europe changed drastically? So what if the Wang family of Beihai had hidden dangers? When he was at his peak, everyone under his sword was like an ant a piece of grass. The sword edge was unsheathed little by little. His figure rose little by little in the sea. This speed was very slow, but it was extremely heavy. At this moment, the Sword Emperor and his sword seemed to be driving the whole world. The world suddenly fell silent. Above the headquarters of Samsara Palace, the dreamy and blurred light column was still rotating, covering the entire island. The island was shaking. In everyone's horrified eyes, as far as their eyes could see, the sea area of at least 10,000 meters or even more was boiling like crazy in an instant. The vast sea was constantly shaking under the tremendous force, bringing up monstrous waves. The wind in the air completely stopped, and the whole world seemed to become an extremely violent but silent world. The vibration of the island was silent. The rolling of the waves was silent. The supermasters of Samsara opened their mouths and could not make sound. There was only sword intent in the air. The sword intent rushed out of the deep sea. It fell from the sky. The vast world was full of swords. The sea surface shook more and more violently. The sparkling sea surface gradually changed color, and the flashing light gradually turned pure white. The tremendous force completely stirred the seawater in the area of 10,000 meters. The seawater began to rise silently and overflowed the edge of the island. Everyone could only watch this scene helplessly. In the silence, there was an indescribable sense of powerlessness and despair. Boom! The loud sound, as if the world was broken, suddenly sounded at the moment when the sea surface boiled to the limit. The sky fell and the earth cracked. It was deafening. No one could see Wang Tianzong's figure. There was only the sea in front of everyone. The sea was completely overturned. The sea area of 10,000 meters rose at the same time with a crazy eruption of sword intent. The seawater was rising continuously and hitting the sky. What was the connection between the sky and the sea? This was not the scene at the end of the sight. In the loud roar, the endless seawater on the sea surface was like a mountain suddenly rising from the sea. The mountain was 10,000 meters high, and the sword intent was awe-inspiring, going straight into the sky. It was close at hand, but it was so high that one could not see the edge. Infinite sword intent. Boundless huge waves. The wild waves, like giant pillars supporting the sky, seemed to reach the end of the sky and then fell down wildly. The sword intent that broke out completely in an instant completely merged with the huge waves. The flying current went down 30,000 feet. Under the sword energy, there was only destruction. This was the full outbreak of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. This was the peak sword of the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. It surpassed the collision between a sword intent and deity when he was in Heaven Capital. It surpassed the 25th blade in the night sky of Lenin. The sword energy was 10,000 meters long, mighty and mighty. 6 paths of reincarnation. One sword to dominate the world. The 10,000-meter-long sword energy fell from the sky, and heaven and earth seemed to be rotating. There was only one sword in the world. In the headquarters of the Samsara Palace, a large number of lights rotated in the trembling. The light illuminated the sky, the mountain-like towering waves, and the sword. This sword was like a mountain, like a sky curtain. The most invincible sword. Boom! Countless beams of light rotated on the island, and a large area of smoke and fire appeared in every corner of the Samsara Palace. All the weapons in the headquarters of the Samsara Palace fired at the same time. In the smoke, the faint blue lightning was faint. All the superiors of the thunder-shocking realm were breaking out all their strength regardless of life and death. The huge waves, the sword energy, the sparks, and the lightning met in the air. In the rolling smoke, the blurred and dreamy beams of light were still rotating. The waves in the deep sea were towering, and the light on the island was disordered. The smoke, light, and sword intent covered everything. The whole island seemed to disappear completely. All the cannon fire and sword intent were completely shattered by the sword chi that fell straight down. The huge waves condensed by the sword intent burst into splashes all over the sky, but the splashes were condensed and did not disperse. They cycled between the falling waves. The sword intent did not dissipate, but became stronger. On the island of the Samsara Palace, hundreds of beams of light suddenly went out and lit up again. The beams of light intertwined. At the moment of uncertainty, a silent but fierce sword light suddenly lit up in a trance. The sword energy and the huge waves fell between heaven and earth, straight up and down. But the sword light that suddenly lit up seemed to cross the sky and the earth. The extremely condensed sword light was like a crescent moon that was more than a kilometer long. The sword intent lingered, and every arc had natural beauty and dominance. The sword light was still falling. In an instant, the huge arc of light over a kilometer broke through the smoke and fire, flew out of the island, and went straight into the sea. The sword light, with indomitable sharpness and determination, hit the huge waves that connected the sky and the earth hard. The huge waves that were as high as 10,000 meters suddenly trembled. Wang Tianzong, standing at the highest place, also trembled. The next moment, the huge arc of light suddenly shattered, and the sword intent diffused and dissipated. Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation also weakened. But no matter how weak it was also 6 paths of reincarnation. The huge wave connecting the sky and the earth seemed to have changed, but it also seemed to have not changed. The seawater kept rising into the sky, and then fell down with the incomparably majestic sword intent. Water was the softest, but the water in the sword intent was as cold as ice and as hard as steel. The majestic sword energy fell in the center of the Samsara Palace. The sky and the earth shook together. All the light on the island disappeared in an instant. The sword energy pierced the island from the sky, then the island, and went straight into the deep sea. Cracks appeared on the whole island in the continuous loud noise. The center of the island suddenly burst out a light that reflected the waves and the sword energy. The sword energy penetrated the whole island, and the land on the island was instantly broken. The land and stones kept flying, and it spread to the whole island from the center. The supermaster of the Samsara Palace, the woman in the cloak. It was a magnificent building. Flowers, trees, beaches, weapons, everything was fluttering in the sword intent. The 10,000-meter high waves finally fell and hit the wreckage of the island hard. The island shook and sank completely into the deep sea. The boiling seawater flooded the entire headquarters of the Samsara Palace, and there was no trace of its existence. Wang Tianzong's body shook violently in the air. Because of exhaustion, his face was a little pale. But the whole island was completely turned into dust under his sword, and a small amount of wreckage had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Countless corpses floated in the sea and then sank. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and held listen to the sea tightly in his hand. In the distance, the cloud had emerged from the water and rushed in the direction of Wang Tianzong at full speed. Wang Tianzong slowly landed on the submarine and entered the cabin. "Your Majesty!" Xianming rushed up the first time and seemed to want to help Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong's power broke out too thoroughly, and he seemed to be a little weak and pale. But Xianming's eyes were full of irrational worship and fanaticism. "I'm fine." Through the submarine, Wang Tianzong looked at the sea that no longer existed in front of him. He held listen to the sea in his hand and was silent for a long time. Xianming, who was full of excitement, stood beside him and resisted the desire to speak. He had never seen such a sword move in his life. What was His Majesty thinking at this time when he wielded the sword? "Xianming," Wang Tianzong suddenly spoke. "Yes." Xianming subconsciously straightened his body. Wang Tianzong looked out of the window, his eyes distant. After a long silence, he whispered, "People say that the 4 realms of martial arts are the foundation, and the invincible realm is the limit. What do you think is above the invincible realm?" Xianming's body shook violently, and his heart suddenly felt cold. Wang Tianzong shook his head and whispered, "Go to Huuding." The submarine left quietly. There was no light on the sea, and it became dark again. The tall figure wrapped in a black cloak had been dead for a long time. Her body was almost completely broken, and her limbs were missing. The broken body rose and fell in the sea, lifeless. Another submarine gradually emerged on the sea. A diver jumped out of the submarine, swam to the deep sea, picked up the broken body wrapped in the cloak, and dragged it into the submarine. There was a small conference room in the submarine. Qin Weibai and Lin Fengting sat face to face, and Flaming Fire stood behind Qin Weibai, as usual. There were only 3 of them. There was a screen hanging in the conference room. The screen repeatedly played the scene of Wang Tianzong's attack not long ago. The shaking island, the overturned sponge, the huge waves that suddenly connected heaven and earth, and the sword energy that filled the world. Lin Fengting stared at the screen seriously. Apart from graveness, there were no other emotions in his eyes. This sword move, after a long time, Lin Fengting slowly opened his mouth. His voice was a little hoarse. "I can't catch it. You've just tried. It turns out that you really can't catch it," Qin Weibai said calmly. Before the destruction of the headquarters of Samsara Palace, even Wang Tianzong thought that the huge arc of light was the dying counterattack of the master of Samsara Palace. It was her 24 moves of sword. But at the moment when the light and shadow intertwined and blurred, the huge arc of light was actually driven by Lin Fengting's sword. Lin Fengting was a little far from the island, so the sword energy was a little weak. Wang Tianzong just used one sword move, and he could continue to use the sword. There were all kinds of excuses, but in fact, even if Lin Fengting stood on the island, it was difficult to completely break the 6 paths of reincarnation no matter how many swords he used. Lin Fengting was a little depressed and lost in thought. He was lazy and aloof from the world, but it didn't mean that he really had no desire to win. He knew that he was no match for Wang Tianzong, but he never thought that under this sword move, the gap between him and Wang Tianzong would be so huge. Wang Tianzong broke through. Qin Weibai said softly. Her voice was very soft, but the content was earth-shattering. Lin Fengting and Flaming Fire trembled at the same time. Of course, it's just half a step forward from the peak of the invincible realm. But this half a step is already enough to widen the gap that already exists. Qin Weibai's tone was a little complicated. The sword move just now came from the deep sea. Under great pressure, it made Wang Tianzong go further. This is my miscalculation. If I'm right, the current Wang Tianzong is only half a level lower than Dongqing Huangtu in the past. In this era, it's really hard for him to find an opponent. Dongqing Huangtu. Lin Fengting smiled self-deprecatingly. The real chosen one. Obviously, Wang Tianzong is only half a step away from the real chosen one, or even infinitely close. Qin Weibai looked at the screen and said softly, "In fact, it's normal." The Wang family of Beihai has been glorious for too long. The longer it is glorious, the greater the pressure on the air. Now that chaos is coming, it's no surprise that Wang Tianzong broke through under such pressure. Lin Fengting smiled, took a deep breath, and barely stabilized his mind. What should Tianlan do? He asked softly. The final maneuver is about to begin. Who can control Wang Tianzong? The Dongxing clan has the power to make Wang Tianzong afraid. Qin Weibai was silent for a long time before she whispered. Just afraid? Lin Fengting asked. If Tianzong has made up his mind, can Tianlan survive? Qin Weibai was silent. Silence itself was an answer. This is not a foolproof plan, Lin Fengting said. Who could have thought that he would break through today? If there is no breakthrough, the Huading maneuver is foolproof. Qin Weibai's tone was a little bitter. The door of the conference room was pushed open. An elite of Samsara Palace in a diving suit put half of the black body on the conference table, and then left in silence. Qin Weibai looked at the body on the conference table silently. The master of Samsara Palace did not draw her sword in the headquarters. So it was not the master of Samsara Palace under the cloak. But Wang Tianzong would not know this. Qin Weibai reached out and lifted the cloak on the body. The face of Shadowless, one of the 12 supermasters of Samsara Palace, was revealed. She looked at Shadowless's body and took a deep breath. After today, Samsara Palace will turn from bright to dark. All the sacrifices are worth it. Unfortunately, she did not finish her words. But Lin Fengting knew what she was going to say. Wang Tianzong broke through again, and his sword intent reached 10,000 meters. He was almost on par with the Chosen One. If he had been a little closer at that time, even if he did not die today, he would have gained enough surprises. Unfortunately, Lin Fengting shook his head with a bitter smile. Am I going to Huading? No. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.